I'll start off by saying that I'm now a man in my early 30s, and this is an experience I'll never forget. I was around 19 years old at the time. I'd like to go on Craigslist in the personal section and see what all I could find. I was young, dumb, and bored. Not exactly the right combination. I had already met a woman on Craigslist before, and it was an amazing experience. She was older, and she taught me a few things. It was an experience any male fantasizes of having in their youth. One night I was scrolling through Craigslist in hopes to find another woman to possibly have the same experience again. I chatted with several women, but they all went stale after a while. They were either too cautious and thought I was catfishing them, or I caught on and I knew they were fake. Then one woman caught my attention. We'll call her Sarah so no one gets confused. Sarah had a normal picture on her ad. It didn't have any filters on it, and she wasn't wearing too much makeup. Her ad said she was looking for a guy to show her a good time, no strings attached, preferably younger, clean, and generous. I messaged Sarah and we chatted for a few minutes. The normal, hey, how are you, blah blah blah, filling each other out. Then she asked for a picture of me, so I sent one with my face covered by a black circle, so to show plenty of my features without fully giving away who I was. Sarah then sent me a full body picture of her. In the picture, Sarah had a normal, what I would call a mom body. Not a model figure, but not overly plus sized. Sarah had all the right curves in all the right places. With her picture being so normal, I was hooked. Sarah had to be the real thing. We chatted for a few more minutes, and things started to get heated. We talked about what we liked in the bedroom, and what we didn't like. Sarah then asked if I wanted to come over. Duh. I asked her where she lived, and she told me. The address she gave me was only 30 minutes away from me. I was really excited. At the time, I still lived with my parents, so this was perfect. I could sneak out and be gone about 2 hours, give or take, and then be back before they even knew I was gone. So I told Sarah how long it would take for me to get to her, and that I was on my way. The whole way, Sarah was messaging me and talking dirty to me. But one word kept coming up that I didn't quite understand. Now, I knew most of the online lingo at the time. Clean meant no STDs, safe meant using a condom, that kind of stuff. But she kept asking if I was generous. Looking back, I cringe at how blind I was at this, but young 19-year-olds aren't always using the right brain. At the time, I thought generous meant that I would make sure she got off as well as me. I knew that most guys treat women poorly. Most men would finish and leave the women laying there just not receiving the same treatment. So I just kept saying, yes, I'm very generous. So as I started getting closer to the address, I noticed that I'm not in a good part of town. I'm passing rundown houses with boarded up windows and trash all in the yards. I try not to judge because Sarah's house might not be like that. I then pull up to the address, and Sarah's house isn't as dirty as the other houses, but it is kind of sketchy. Now, I'll say I'm not a tall, buff guy, but I am athletically built and I can hold my own in a fight. So I was a little scared, yeah. But again, not thinking with the right brain. I did have the common sense to make sure I had the right address, so I asked Sarah to give me a sign I was at the right place. Next thing I knew, I saw curtains move, and I saw a woman's head peek through, and she then motioned for me to come inside. Alright, a little weight is lifted as I then got out of my car. As I walked up to the house, it was a 2-story brick house that was up on a slight hill. Other houses all around are almost the same type. As I walk up, I'm constantly looking around me. I see other people on their porches and watching me. I start to get that uneasy feeling again. I walk up the steps and I see that the porch is trashed. The only clean spot is the welcome mat. I knock on the door, and then this man appears. Now I'm starting to rethink this whole idea. He isn't too much bigger than me, and he then says,
"Oh, you must be here for Sarah. I'm her brother."
Sarah never mentioned a brother to me when we were messaging. I could see some resemblances, but I still wasn't too sure about coming inside. The man called and said,
"Hey Sarah, your guy's here."
I then heard Sarah say, "Come on in, I'm just finishing up." Okay, I heard her voice and it sounded really nice and sweet, so I walked in. The man went into the living room where he was watching TV, which was also trashed. The inside of this house looked horrible. I've watched several movies and cop shows to know what the inside of a drug house looks like, and this checked all the boxes. I didn't see any drugs yet, but I was looking because as soon as I did, I was out of there. As I walked further into the house, I had heard a door open down the hall. I turned towards the door, and out walked a woman who did not look like the Sarah I was talking to. The woman greeted, and I then asked, "Sarah?" She said yes, and she apologized for her appearance because she was very self-conscious. Now, I'm not the one to fat shame or anything, but Sarah standing before me was 3 times the size of the Sarah in the pictures. If I had to guess, this Sarah was using a relative because I could see some similarities, but she was a totally different person than that in the picture. Sarah had on makeup and was wearing a long nightgown. Her breasts took up half of her front, and I didn't want to hurt her feelings. She was still rather pretty. At the time, I hadn't been with a woman her size before, so I didn't want to judge a book by its cover. All of y'all listening are probably thinking, "You're thinking with the wrong head and just want to see her boobs." Well, yeah, you're right. I drove all that way, and I didn't want to waste my time. She was a real person. This was gonna be a one-time thing, so why not? Sarah opened her room door and then let me in. I asked, "Won't your brother hear us?" To which Sarah then said, "No, the TV's loud enough." Sarah turned on the light to her room. I about threw up. Trash was everywhere. 80% of the room was taken up by what looked like a queen-sized bed, but I couldn't fully tell because the other side of the bed was covered in trash and God knows what else. I saw everything you could think of. Books, newspapers, DVD cases, pizza boxes, takeout trays, you name it, it was on the bed. I turned and Sarah was literally blocking the door and then had the nerve to say, "Sorry about the mess." If it wasn't the side of the room, it was the smell that almost put me over the edge. It was a smell of trash and cheap air freshener, clean linen smell. But the trash smell was definitely overpowering the air freshener. The only room to move around was the little strip of walkway from the door to the bed, which the bed was right beside the door. So approximately 3 feet into the room and not even a foot wide of space. I couldn't turn around without touching something. I moved out of Sarah's way for her to sit down on the bed. I have never in my whole life seen a sight when Sarah then sat on that bed. As soon as Sarah sat on the bed, cockroaches scattered from every opening on the bed to include from under her. As I watched them scatter, I had started to see more and more around the room. I don't know how I missed them before, but they were everywhere. She motioned for me to sit beside her, and I then said, "No, I'm good. I've been sitting all day, and then that drive. I need to stretch a bit." Sarah then began to lean back into the pile of garbage and started moving her hands all over her body trying to be sexy. I couldn't stop watching more cockroaches scrambled out from under her. She then asked me, "So how generous are you gonna be?" I honestly didn't know how to answer. 1, I was holding back my stomach from coming out of my mouth, and 2, I just couldn't begin to think about touching this woman. I didn't want to come off rude or anything. So my mind was racing, trying to think of an excuse to run away. Sarah then pulled out one of her boobs, and to this day is the biggest breast I've ever seen, but really wish I hadn't. Moles were all over this thing, and her skin looked so oily. She then said while holding her breast, "This can be all yours as long as you're generous enough." Now that my other brain is shut off, my actual brain finally kicked in. Generous must mean money. Sarah was a prostitute. Bingo, I found my excuse. I immediately began to apologize. "Oh, that's what generous means. I'm so sorry. I thought it meant something else. I can't begin to say how sorry I am, but I don't have any money on me." As I'm saying all this, I'm backing up towards the bedroom door, speaking really fast. Sarah, with her breast still out, gets up with a mean look on her face. "Well, you owe me something for wasting my day," Sarah said angrily. I didn't stop backing up. "I'm sorry, I don't carry cash on me." Sarah then calls for her brother, who's now facing right behind me with his arms crossed. Sarah and her brother have me trapped in a hallway. Sarah's blocking one side while her brother's blocking the other. I look at her brother and then say, "Look man, this is all a misunderstanding. I didn't know I was supposed to pay for anything tonight. Let me just go and we'll get on with our night." The brother then smiled at me and then said,
My sister is standing there with her beautiful boob out for you. So to me, something happened in that room that deserves some form of payment.
I look back at Sarah, then back at her brother. "I don't have any cash. I keep it all in the bank." At this time, Cash App and Venmo wasn't really a thing, so my only option was to keep playing this card and hope it works. The brother looks at me.
What's in your wallet?
I started patting my basketball shorts and then said, "No pockets. I don't have my wallet on me. It's out in my car." The brother turned to look at my car, then back at me with an aggravated look on his face. I had to think quickly. I knew Sarah wasn't a threat, but if I got knocked to the ground with her brother, I was done for. Like I said before, I was athletic and I could hold my own in a fight, but not knowing what drugs this guy was on or how much alcohol was in his system, taking him on forcefully was not a great idea. So with whatever courage I had, I started to say, "Okay, look, I don't carry cash, that is the truth, just in case of situations like this. So the best and smart thing for you to do is let me go, and we go on about our night and act like nothing's happened. Or in about 30 minutes, my friend's gonna call my phone, which is in my car. If I don't answer my phone, he immediately calls the cops and gives them this address. So what's it gonna be?" The more I talked, the more I felt myself puffing up and trying to keep the most serious face so that the brother could not call my bluff. He looked at his sister and then said,
It's not worth the risk. You know what all I have upstairs. People would come looking for this kid.
He then looked at me and asked,
Nothing happened tonight, and you lose our address.
I nodded my head, and the brother stepped aside. I hightailed it out that door and jumped in my car and then sped off. I didn't slow down until I got home. I snuck back into my room and my parents never even knew that I left. I never went back on Craigslist again. For a while, I didn't use any dating platform. Every now and again, I have nightmares that I'm stuck in that room with cockroaches all around me, or that I'm stuck in that hallway with both siblings closing in on me. I never told anyone about that night. To all the young men out there, be mindful of your conversation with whoever you're talking to. Ask questions if you don't understand something. I got lucky this time, but that night could have been my last night. My name is Carissa, and this happened back in my drug days. My ex and I were staying in a shitty motel, and me being the only one keeping us afloat, I danced at a local club which barely paid for our room and habit. Apparently, when I was working, my ex was going around scoring and owing every dealer in town. One day out of nowhere, we get a knock at the door. Nothing too hard. My ex, who we'll call E, opened it, and this man pounced right on E and then knocked him to the ground. Then followed two women. Not being stereotypical, but they were butch and quite scary. So altogether, 2 men and 2 women. I've never been in a fight before, mind you, so this was scary as hell.
"Where's my fucking money?"
asked the big dude. He answered, asking what money. The big dude then replied back with,
"The $300 that you owe me."
I about shit my pants. $300? All in drugs? Then without hesitation, he looked at me demanding I give him everything I had. That night had been extremely slow at work, so I barely even had $30. I remember sitting on my wallet praying that they didn't ask me to get up. Without that money, we would have been kicked out. Then out of nowhere, the bigger dude asked if I wanted to be manhandled too. The 2 women were pretty much sitting on edge like lions ready to attack me. I was terrified. I told them this had nothing to do with me, which being addicts themselves, they didn't care. My ex blurted out how he'd swore that he'd have the money the very next day, which I knew was bullshit. They said they'd come back tomorrow, which came way too quickly. He had been trying to scrape up enough money to suffice them, but in my opinion, he couldn't save it before spending it. I was off that day, and I had zero way of making any money. 9 p.m. rolled around, and I assumed that they just gave up. Unfortunately, I was wrong. He was so-called out making money, and he left me there to, I assume, handle everything. I had just calmed myself down when I had heard knocks that sounded like the cops. I immediately ran to the shower and sat there while the door shook like crazy, while those people were making sure they made themselves known. I wanted to go get the phone, but I was too scared they'd hear me from outside. The pounding went on for at least 40 minutes, which seemed like hours. Eventually they left, but he never came back to the room that night, and I was way too scared to go look for him. The next day, I see E with a hoodie on covering his face. Let's just say after my scare, they had caught him hiding in an empty room. Apparently, the hotel manager gave E the key to hide, but the owner eventually snitched on him. I assume from their threats. Right after the mayhem, I then dipped and got my own place. I still to this day don't know if the money was ever paid back, but all I know is I made it out without ever being manhandled. This encounter happened to me when I was around 14 to 15. It was during the middle of winter, so it got dark quickly, and I was walking home from school with my older brother because we both missed our bus. The walk home from school was about an hour long, and we barely made 20 minutes into our walk, and my brother decided to stop in the middle of downtown to study in the library. I didn't want to go with them because it was getting late, and I was getting hungry. I just wanted to get home as fast as possible. I was hesitant at first, but I didn't feel comfortable walking alone in the dark, but I still did in the end. The sky was a deep blue color, and it was cloudy outside. I was speed walking out of the library when I noticed a middle-aged man also speed walking behind me. I was passing by a bus stop, so I assumed he was going there. When he didn't stop there, I had started to panic, so I started to speed walk faster and kept looking back every second. My intuition told me that something was wrong, and I was nowhere near home yet, and I was really tired and hungry. So I decided to cross the street and head back to the library. As I was waiting for the cars to pass, I then saw him approaching me and getting closer. I eventually crossed the street, and he also crossed the street at the same time that I did. That's when I knew that I was being followed, so I decided to run and not look back. When I finally reached the library, I looked back and I didn't see him. I finally made it back safe into the library, telling my brother everything that happened. He gave me his PB&J sandwich that he didn't eat because I was so hungry, and I was very thankful. Eventually, our dad came back from work, and he had picked us up around 6 to 7 p.m. I know this may not be the scariest story to some of you, but in that moment of being followed by that middle-aged man, I was terrified. I'm just so glad that I listened to my intuition. I really hope anyone listening to this also listens to their own intuition. It's there for a reason. Stay safe, everyone, and be aware of your surroundings. When I was in my early 20s, my date and I decided to go to the Sail Inn in West Sacramento to play pool. We'd been there before and enjoyed speaking with the bartender. I can't recall her name, but she was a lovely woman, and we chatted with her whenever we encountered her. She was a very warm and bubbly woman. This particular night, we walked in and we noticed the pool table was occupied. There was a man and woman shooting a game, so my date bought us some drinks while I watched. After a few minutes, the man noticed me and struck up a conversation with me. When my date came over with our drinks, the man had asked us if we wanted to shoot a game with them. It didn't occur to me at the time that his female companion hadn't said anything. We said yes, so he racked up the balls and we played against them. During the game, we introduced ourselves, and right after, the man began asking me some personal questions that really started to bother me. Like, where did I live? Had my date and I been dating long? Did we live together? Etc. I noticed that the man and woman kept looking at each other. I became increasingly uncomfortable, even though the rest of the conversation was benign and pleasant in nature. Weirdly enough, the woman still hadn't said a word. When the game was over, the man had asked if we wanted to leave with him to go to another bar down the street. At first, I didn't say anything. Then the guy asked us again, saying they discovered a cool bar not too far from where we were. My date and I just looked at each other, and before he could say anything, I blurted out, no thanks, we have dinner plans. We in fact did not have any dinner plans, but my date didn't argue with me. I think he saw the look of panic that was on my face. We grabbed our jackets and got the hell out of there. By the time we walked out the door, the hair was literally standing on the back of my neck. When we got back to my truck, my date had asked me what the hell was wrong. I told him that I got a horrible feeling from those people, and I just knew that we had to get away from them. I told him how it was weird that he asked us to leave with them when he didn't check with his date first. He shrugged and just said okay. I think he thought I was crazy. Well, a few days later, when I opened up the afternoon paper, there was an article in there about a woman from West Sacramento who'd been found murdered. I didn't really think anything of it. That is, until I got to the page where the article was continued, and the picture of the woman practically leapt out of the page at me. It was the bartender from the Sail Inn. Apparently she'd been kidnapped, raped, and killed that very night that I was there with my date. Long story short, the man and woman we'd encountered were called Gerald Gallego and Charlene Adele. Gerald was a serial rapist and sadomasochist, and from my understanding, he was sexually abusive toward Charlene, although she clearly partook in and shared in his sick and twisted crimes. Some of the victims were kept as slaves, and Gerald would repeatedly rape and abuse the poor girls and women. Many of them were young teenagers, like 14 years old. I'll attach an article about them for proof. The article mentions the bartender as well as the other victims. It says that Charlene met Gerald at a poker game in Sacramento, but it doesn't give a name. My mind can't help but wonder if it was the same place that me and my date were at. For years, I've struggled with guilt that the bartender ended up being one of the victims instead of me. I know I'm incredibly lucky that nothing happened to me, but it really breaks my heart to know what her final moments were. How much pain and terror that she must have endured. She was truly such a nice woman. She'd served us all that night. She must have trusted she would be alright when Gerald lured her over to him when she finished work. Apparently, it was his birthday present to himself. How sick is that? Part of me wished I'd warned her. Maybe I should have went over to her and said something such as, "By the way, those two are weird." I don't know. I can't help but go through all of the what ifs. Despite my feeling of being in danger, I never could have predicted what would have ended up happening. Things didn't work out with my date, but I am married now and have been for years now. My husband always tells me you can't predict things like this, and he's right, but it's very unnerving. I raised my children to always trust their instincts, and now that I'm a grandmother, I'll pass this down to my grandkids too, and to anyone else for that matter. That feeling of being prey makes itself known for a reason. Never ignore this feeling. I truly pray that Gerald and Charlene's victims are at peace now. I pray every evening for the loved ones of each victim. None of them deserve such an awful demise. Before I begin, I need to give a warning for sexual assault and pedophilia. I'll also have a news article linked in the description for this story. I grew up in a small town in Louisiana, and for privacy, I won't say where. At the time of this story, I attended a private school that is from kindergarten to grade 12 all in the same building, and I was in the 8th grade. I was a 14-year-old girl who played basketball, golf, and tennis, so I was fairly fit. We had this one basketball coach who I'll call Joe for privacy reasons. Well, Coach Joe was a good basketball coach, and overall a good guy. He was married and had a son who he never shut up about. Coach Joe also made sure if we ever needed to talk to someone, we could always go talk to him. Well, one day I wasn't doing so well at practice because my boyfriend had just dumped me, and it really affected my mental state. Coach Joe then called me into his office, which was a completely covered room with no windows or anything. When I got to his office, he had asked me what was going on, and I explained that my boyfriend had just dumped me after 1.5 years of dating. Coach Joe then offered me a hug, and I accepted. When I wrapped my arms around him, I had felt his hands grab onto my butt. I jumped at his touch because I just wasn't expecting that. Then he whispered into my ear,
"It's okay. Just let it happen."
He then began to grope me and feel all over my body. About 10 minutes later, he had taken my shirt off and is continuing to feel all over my body. That's when I get a call from my mom who had arrived to pick me up from practice. I had told Coach Joe that I had to go, and he then said to me in a very creepy tone,
"Okay, but this isn't over."
He knew I was a quiet kid and that I wouldn't speak up. So all throughout my high school years, he'd call me into his office, and each time it progressively got more and more graphic. It wasn't until several years after I graduated and was about to get married that I finally came clean, because my fiance told me that I had to tell the police what was going on, because apparently Coach Joe was still coaching at the same school. A couple of other students came clean as well, and he actually got locked away for his crimes. Coach Joe, if you ever hear this, fuck you and all the hell you put me through my high school years. I hope you stay locked away for a very long time. The story happened in my home city back in 2015. Some of you may have heard of this event, but to those who don't know about it, here's my story. I was a junior in high school at the time. It started out as an average day with me going through my classes at 4th period. A staff member called on the speaker saying we're going into a lockdown. Most of us students didn't really take these seriously because the most that happened near our high school was petty theft near a store. So we didn't really think much about it because within 20 minutes the lockdown was suspended. After that was my lunch period. So during lunch, I was eating with my friend who we'll call Julie. Julie and I were in the library talking about the lockdown and coming up with theories. until her grandmother called her and told her to go to the front office because she was too worried about her grandchildren. Julia and I still didn't know what the hell was going on at all. We agreed to text each other later that day if we found out anything. So she leaves early, and my lunch ended. Not even 10 minutes, the same staff member announced that we're going into a lockdown yet again, then declaring,
"This is not a drill. This is a real lockdown."
After this announcement, someone found out what was happening. Our city was in the middle of a terrorist attack. A couple came into an office building during a holiday party and shot up the entire building, then sped off, leaving so many people dead or injured. Because of how serious it was, we all had to stay in our 5th period for the rest of the day, and many after-school activities were canceled. As you'd expect, once the school day ended, it was pure chaos. I never saw my high school so packed. In the front, many people were scared and rushing to get their kids out. My mom had to park 3 blocks down to pick me up and then hurry us home. Once I got home, I had texted Julie to see if she was okay. Thankfully, her and her family were safe at home. I went on my phone to keep up to date with what was happening. Later in the day, the SWAT team came, and it was a standoff with the SWAT team shooting down the couple responsible for the attack. In the aftermath of all this, the president at the time, Barack Obama, actually came here to pay his respects to the family and friends of the victims. At school, everyone was on edge about the incident. I was so thankful, though, that the couple didn't come into our school, because apparently during their chase, their car actually drove by our high school once or twice. All I know is if they had come inside, so many more innocent lives would have definitely been taken. This really scared me because I never in a million years would have imagined that a terrorist attack would happen in my own hometown. It really shows that it doesn't matter where you live. Something horrific can happen anywhere. I hope and pray that the families who lost their loved ones are doing well, knowing that that evil couple are now dead and hopefully burning in hell right now. I'll have an article in the description as proof for this story. This isn't your typical scary story, but it was very unsettling for me for a long time, and it really stuck with me for a while. In 2012, I was at an air show with my grandpa. I was 9 at the time. Anyway, we're having lots of fun trying out the different foods, watching the pilots do all sorts of awesome stunts with their aircraft. Next up is a jet duo. They really did some awesome things, and the crowd was going wild because it really was some out-of-this-world level of skill. I remember thinking that the one jet was kind of strange. During the show, it became slower and slower. I found it odd, but just assumed that it was part of the show. This was my very first air show after all. The next moment, the jet is high in the air making a mid-air turn, when the jet takes a dive that looks a bit too steep, and it was. Less than a second later, the jet hits the ground and there's a huge explosion, massive fireball. The crowd got really silent, and I remember to this day that very moment. It felt like time had stopped in that moment. I thought he was going to do another one of those stunts where you pull up before hitting the ground. I wasn't expecting to see what had happened. The silence was then broken by a second explosion. That's when it hit me. This was no stunt. The pilot was dead. I remember going to food stalls afterwards. They decided to continue the show, but people weren't as buzzy as before. There was still the regular noise, but not as much. 4,000 of us went to that show expecting to have a good time. None of us expected to see someone die there. That was the first time I had seen someone die. I can't even begin to imagine the fear he had as he realized what was about to happen to him. I had some medical problems a couple of years later, and I wound up at death's door twice. That's what really made me feel sorry for that pilot, alone in that jet knowing you're about to meet your end. I don't know. Just something about knowing that I witnessed his final moments on Earth just made this story stuck with me. I'll have a link to an article that I found while searching for it. This is something that I rarely discuss for reasons that'll be obvious. I need to give a warning that the story involves incest and sexual abuse of a minor. Growing up, my family were extreme evangelical Christians. We lived somewhere in the Bible Belt, and in the area in which I grew up was rural and religious. I was an only child, and due to being born female, my father felt cursed by God. No matter how much he and my mother tried, they had struggled with fertility. They never went to a doctor as my father didn't believe in such things. When they had me, that was it. My father refused to work and he made my mom go out to work. He said that he was the head of the household and he placed himself above God. He picked and chose whatever bullshit benefited him, and he said it was God's plan. It was cultish, and my father was a disgusting sexist. When I was 12 years old, he started to violate me. He would beat me before this escalation, as well as constantly telling me that I was a curse and a burden to him and my mother. My mother would be there and do nothing about any of this. When I was 12 years old, my period came for the first time. I didn't know what was happening because, of course, my family wouldn't tell me this vital information. I was home alone with my dad, and I ran to him fearfully. He became furious, which only scared me more. He screamed at me, and he then banished me to my bedroom. He didn't go out to buy me products or tell me about this naturally bodily function. Instead, he came into my room and he told me it was time to teach me a lesson. That was when he violated me for the first time. I was so confused and scared. I know this phrasing might sound strange, but I felt heartbroken. I didn't even know what sexual abuse was, but I knew what happened felt wrong, and I felt deeply betrayed. I didn't have the words or understanding to articulate why I felt this way. When my mom came home, she didn't even come into my room to check on me. I remained in my room, too emotionally distraught to dare to leave. I didn't even shower. I was too terrified. I was preparing for my own death due to still not knowing what was happening to me. The next day, my mom woke me up and she told me it was time for breakfast. I must have looked broken inside, but she either didn't notice or just chose to ignore it. I was literally trembling at the breakfast table. I could barely eat my food. Of course, my father was acting like nothing was going on. I was petrified, and I felt like if I ate, I would be sick. I picked up my food, and my father noticed. He screamed at me, and he began quoting scripture. I tried to eat, but I couldn't. He then beat me, and my mother just continued to eat her food in silence. I wanted to scream, ask her why she never stood up for me, but I was so petrified. My father would hit me over my clothes, but on this occasion he had pulled on my clothes and then stared at my bare bottom. This was even more traumatizing, and thinking about it now, I think it was another perverted escalation. I cried from the fear and I was sent to my room, forbidden to eat food for the next 3 days as punishment. I was still bleeding due to my period, and no one gave me any information as to why. My mother worked the night shift. She left the house at 9 p.m., and she wasn't back until 9 a.m. the next morning. She didn't work every night though, and she was home the night after the first violation took place. I was beginning to think that maybe I wasn't actually dying, but I did continue to bleed, and it was a scary experience. I know it sounds so silly, but imagine you found yourself bleeding continuously without even knowing why, especially from such an intimate area of your body. On the second day of my punishment, my stomach was really aching. My mother had work, and my father came into my room yet again. He would say disgusting things to me. He told me that bleeding meant that boys wanted to do what he was doing to me, and that he had to do this so that other boys wouldn't. I didn't understand what he meant by this at all. I didn't know very much about sex. I kept thinking that I didn't want boys to do what my father was doing to me. It made me feel ill to even imagine anyone doing this to me. When it was over, he told me if I was good, he would give me some food. He then demanded that I do something to him, and I was too terrified to refuse. I didn't want to. I really didn't want to. It makes my stomach heave even now to remember this. When it was finally all over, he gave me an apple. I didn't feel hungry anymore. I couldn't even bring myself to eat it, and he began ranting and raving at me. He screamed sexist things to me, saying things about Eve, ranting about how Eve ate the apple and doomed us all, and it's the fault of women that the world is such a sick place, and that even when offered an apple, women can't eat it because they want to damn us all. I don't know if he planned scenarios like this like he was in a play as an excuse to scream the bullshit that he would regurgitate. I just knew then I felt like I was in hell and I would never get out of it. I ended up being starved for 6 days, 3 extra days for not eating that stupid apple. Sometimes I wonder if he knew I wouldn't be able to eat it after he tormented me. My period eventually stopped, and I felt relieved. I was forced to sleep in blood-stained bedding. My mother washed my bedding. She must have saw the bloodstains that were always there. I just can't understand why she didn't put 2 and 2 together and figure out my period was here and that I was being sexually abused. I don't think she ever cared, because one night she could have saved me and chose not to. The abuse continued, no matter what I did to stop him. I wanted to try to fight. I would scream, I would cry, I would beg and plead. I realized the only way to get through it was to close my eyes and bite the inside of my mouth until it bled. I felt like I was always bleeding. One night my mother came home. She was sent home due to being sick. I heard the front door, but my father didn't. Or maybe he did and knew she wouldn't stop him. My bedroom door was open. I had my head facing the door, with locked eyes because I opened mine. I thought that at any minute now she'll save me. She'll finally save me. I won't have to endure this agony any longer. Instead of saving me though, she just stood and watched for an entire minute. Then she just simply walked away. Tears flooded my eyes, but I refused to let them out. I squeezed my eyes shut again, and I swallowed my sobs down. My father left and shut my door. I then curled in a ball ready to cry, but I couldn't. From this night forward, I was completely numb. The abuse continued and I learned how to switch it off. Sometimes I felt floods of anger in my chest when my father began his violations on me. It made me feel violent, not out of simply wanting to defend myself, but out of hatred. I'd think about being strong enough to get him off me and imagine what it would be like to beat him. I know this is a dark thought, but I knew what he was doing was deeply wrong. The abuse went on until I was 15 years old. I finally learned what rape was when I was 13. My parents started to homeschool me when I was 10, but when I was 13, I had to go back to school. My father was furious as usual, but he had no choice but to let me go. I had finally learned about periods. Up until this point, I was totally desensitized to the monthly bleeding. I also learned what sex was, and I started to actually fully grasp just how disturbing what my father was doing to me was. I knew it was wrong. I always knew it was incredibly wrong, but I didn't understand it before. Now I was starting to understand it properly. I struggled to process it for a very long time. I remember being 14 and a boy in my class would always smile at me, and it made me feel scared. My father's sick words echoed in my head, and I feared he wanted to hurt me just like my father. I was so sheltered and clueless due to my parents' cultish abuse for my entire life. I didn't have many friends in school because I really struggled to get close to people. I blended in and I was always too quiet. I wanted someone to notice something was wrong, but no one ever did. I remember learning that rape was a crime. A girl I was friendly with was talking about rapists, and I had asked what that meant. Learning there was a word for it, and knowing it was happening to me was one of those pivotal moments in my life. The kind of moment you know you can never come back from. Rage was literally pulsating through my veins. I felt red hot with rage, remembering how my mother stood there, watching her disgusting husband rape her own daughter. Her own fucking flesh and blood. I started to think about how my own father could do such a despicable thing to me. How any normal person would be horrified to know about this. Then I felt shame. Shame certainly wasn't foreign to me, but I felt like I was feeling it tenfold now. I stayed quiet. This was around the time that I began to act out very badly. I started to wear makeup. My father told me that only harlots wore that filth, but he made me feel like one of those women. I felt like I was an object, damaged and good for nothing. I started wearing mascara and eyeliner, borrowed from girls in school. I'd wash it off right before I got home. One time I didn't, and my father called me a harlot. When he violated me, he just kept telling me that I was a harlot the entire time, and that he was sick of me enticing him. As puberty continued, my father made worse and worse comments about my body. I started hanging out with older kids from another school. I met these kids from skipping class one day and walking around. I had stumbled across this group who were smoking, and I joined them. Soon I was drinking, and my father was beating me more and more, but I didn't care anymore. When I was 15, one night I stayed out on a Friday night. I stayed out too late. I wasn't drunk, and one of the boys I was with tried it on me. He didn't even do anything bad. He told me he liked me, and he asked for permission to kiss me. I had freaked out because all I could think of was every time my father had forced his own tongue down my throat. I pushed him and then took off. I know that I reacted badly. I really feel terrible for pushing him. He did nothing wrong, but I was triggered. I felt rage bubbling over the surface. I suppose anger was always simmering within me, but now it was really boiling. I kept thinking about my father, the things he did. I realized as I was running that I'd reacted so wrongly. I really resented my father for ruining my life. I had never kissed a boy before, and this boy said he liked me. But I knew if he knew what my father did to me, he wouldn't like me anymore. I felt like no one could ever respect me or like me. I was branded a harlot for life who was so dirty she enticed her own father. These were my father's vile words, but they infiltrated my mind and planted seeds within my heart. If someone ever tells you it's your fault enough times, you start to believe them. I got home and my mother was out. I knew what was waiting for me. I knew my father was furious, but this night I was different. I felt like a dragon breathing fire. I slammed the front door open and rushed to my bedroom. My father shouted out "hey" to me, but I ignored him. I moved my bedside table against my door to lock him out. I then stood at the edge of my bed, my heart thumping. My father was screaming at me to open the door, swearing at me and using God's name in vain. I remember screaming that I wouldn't let him touch me anymore, and he told me I was his and that he could do whatever he wanted with me. He then told me that he needed to teach me another lesson, and I began to tremble. He was pounding on the door, and I could hear him slamming a shoulder against it. I knew it wouldn't hold. Our house was old and shabby. My bedside table wasn't sufficient enough either. My father was a large man. I knew I couldn't let this happen to me anymore. All this rage was spilling out of me. When he finally burst the door down, he ran at me. I darted to the side, and he fell on my bed. I ran out of my room hurting my leg, but not noticing it until much later. I then ran into the kitchen and grabbed a knife. My hands were shaking, but I grabbed it, and I spun around to then see my father. I held the knife out in front of me, so if he ran at me, he would fall right into it, if that makes sense. He froze, and his fear flashed in his eyes for a brief second. All I could hear was my own heavy breathing and my own heart thumping in my chest. It was silent for so long, before my father suddenly spoke very calmly. He told me to put down the knife and be a good girl. Big mistake on his part. Him saying that brought back many painful memories, and my anger was exploding out of me. I then shouted at him to stay the fuck away from me and to never call me that. He then laughed at himself uncomfortably, which only made me angrier. I then screamed at him that it wasn't funny, and it was like once I started, I couldn't stop. I can't even remember all of what I shouted, but I started shouting at him. I told him that I hated him, and that he had been raping me since I was 12 years old, and I knew it was wrong. That I knew about my periods, that I wanted to hurt him like he'd hurt me all these years. I just kept saying that I hated him and my mother. I kept swearing at him. He was getting angrier and angrier. I could sense it. I then threatened him that if he came towards me, I'd cut him, and I told him I was leaving and he couldn't follow me. He told me I couldn't go, and I again threatened him. I only had the clothes on my back, but I knew if I didn't leave now, I wasn't going to make it out. I walked around him still holding the knife. I maneuvered my way to the front door, and I told him I was leaving and to not dare to try and find me. He told me not to do this, that there would be trouble and all that bullshit. I opened the door and he suddenly ran at me. I slashed him across the face with the knife, and it made him stagger back and scream. I then turned and ran, and I didn't stop. My heart was beating so fast and my nose was badly running, but I just kept going. I'm not really sure when I dropped the knife, but I did lose it. I didn't even know where the hell I was eventually. I eventually ended up stopping at the side of a road. I didn't know where I was. I'd ran for so long and in a direction that I'd never really been to before. I didn't feel scared. I felt free. I walked for a long time. I found a bus stop and I sat in the shelter resting my eyes. When morning arrived, I wasn't sure what to do. 2 women and a man turned up, and I remember asking one of the women about the bus. She explained the route to me, and she seemed concerned. She asked if I was all right, and I told her I didn't know. She asked me where my parents are, and I told her I didn't even have any. I lied and I said I was 18 and that I didn't need parents. She looked doubtful but concerned. When the bus came, she asked if I was getting on. I said I wasn't sure, and she held her hand out to me. I stepped towards her and she turned to the driver and asked for 2 tickets. She paid for me to get in. No one had ever done something so kind like that for me. She sat next to me on the bus, and she tried to gently probe for more information about me. I shut her down, but I was polite about it. She sat with me on the bus for about an hour probably. She told me that she had to get off soon, but she wanted to give me money. I told her I didn't need it, but she insisted. She handed me $150, and she told me to watch out for myself. She got off, and I started to cry. I finally got off when I was the final passenger, and the driver told me that this was the end of the line. He asked if I was okay, and I said yes. He didn't bother to pry. I was in a town that I wasn't sure where I was, and I didn't know what to do. I just wandered the streets before going into a cafe and just sitting down. I was ordered to leave, however, as I didn't order anything. Long story short, I began sleeping rough. I used the money that the lady gave me for traveling until I was out of the state. I bought myself a bag and I had bought myself some food. When it got low, I knew I had to get more. Sometimes strangers would give me cash. The streets weren't safe, especially as a female. I had some pretty scary encounters, but I managed to get away unscathed. I dreamt about my father every night, always nightmares. I wondered if he and my mother missed me, if they were looking for me. I never heard of any missing persons with my name, never saw my picture. I was on the street for months. I ended up finding a charity in a town, and they helped me out tremendously. They got me in a hostel sort of place, which was much safer. They didn't pry, didn't try to force me back to be with my family. They tried to give me an education and teach me skills. I had a support worker who sort of acted like a therapist, but I never fully opened up about my past. I was way too ashamed and afraid. When I was 17, I was finally able to get a part-time job. It was nothing special, but it was something. And then when I was 18, I went full-time. I managed to have enough to rent out a small place to live in. It was a struggle. I couldn't always afford to stay warm. I couldn't always afford to eat as much as I'd have liked, but I felt independent and safe. Safe for the first time in my life. Things eventually began to get better. I had insomnia issues. I didn't feel safe in my own bed, and the memories of my father always haunted me. I struggled with intimacy. I really couldn't trust any man, and I thought I never would. I realized that I didn't believe in my father's religion as time went on. It was really painful to realize just how fucked up my childhood was, just how deplorable both of my parents were. It was hard. When I was 23, I started to talk. I managed to make some female friends, and I met who would later become my best friend. She was the first person that I ever opened up to, and she encouraged me to reach out for professional support. It was so painful, but I knew that I had to do it. When I was 26 years old, I had met a man, and I felt myself liking him. I was really nervous, but we ended up getting together. I didn't open up about my past, but he knew I found intimacy difficult. He knew that something had happened, but I never told him what. We broke up after over a year together, but that relationship was the first time that I dared trust another man, and he never once broke my trust. When I was 30, I met the man who would later become my husband. I knew early on he was special, but it didn't scare me like I thought it would. I was still cautious, but we clicked together so well that I found myself letting him inside my heart in a way that no one else had ever been. I told him everything that happened to me one night when he was at my place, and I expected him to be disgusted or to view me differently. He never did. He listened, and he told me he really appreciated me opening up like that. He then asked if it was okay to hug me, and I said yes. When we had been together for 3 years, I fell pregnant. I was really afraid I couldn't handle having a girl. But when I found out our baby was indeed a girl, I felt a fierce need to protect her. When she was finally born, I felt a love that I can't even describe. When our daughter was 5 years old, my husband and I finally got married. Now that I have my own family, I view my parents in a way different light again. I'll never understand how they could do everything they did. I would go to war for my baby girl. I would walk through fire to protect her. What happened to me will always hurt and can never be erased, but I've clawed my way out of hell. Having my own family is something that I never even thought was possible. Every morning I wake up, I feel safe. I now know that everything my father said isn't true, and his evil actions do not define me. My husband truly loves me and respects me. He's never even raised his voice at me once. To him, I'm not tainted, and I can finally sleep soundly, most of the time that is, in my safe home. I've never once heard from my parents. I don't even know if they're still alive. I never want to hear from them ever again. They're dead to me. I know that my story is very long and distressing, but I want people to know that it is never your fault if someone violates you. You did not ask for it. You did not seduce someone to hurt you. These people are depraved at their core. We aren't the depraved ones. It is possible to rebuild your life in the face of the most horrifying things, and anyone who ever uses religion to justify their abuse is an abuser. Seek out support and never stop seeking it until you find it. It's absolutely unfair to have to heal from things like this, but it's crucial that you do. If you've been through something similar, I promise you are not alone. You won't ever forget it, but you don't need to spend your life drowning in it. I promise you can get through it. When I was 16, I had a boyfriend who was 24. He lived a street away from me, and he would come into the charity store that I volunteered at part-time. He was friendly at first, before gradually becoming flirty, and I fell for it. Hook, line, and sinker. He had asked me on a date after chatting with me for about 3 months, and I accepted. I knew that I couldn't tell my parents. I reasoned in my young mind that they just wouldn't understand, and that me and this guy were Romeo and Juliet. I know it's cringy, but it's how I felt at that age. I'll call this guy Greg. Greg had took me to an American-style diner that served both American and Italian food. I had never been on a date before, and I felt so grown up. The place wasn't posh by any means, but still, I felt so grown up and cool. I had a boyfriend when I was 14, my age obviously, and we never went on a date or anything. My friends who had boyfriends would just go to the movies or go to Taco Bell and Starbucks. I just felt so cool being with someone older, and Greg made me feel wise beyond my years. I cringe so much typing all of this up now, but at the time I was just so naive and susceptible to his bullshit. The age of consent in my country is 16, but I don't know if that means Greg was legally fine in dating me. Either way, he was only with me because he wanted someone young to use, and he knew I'd be naive, and no woman his own age would ever want him. I can only see that now as an adult myself. He asked me to be his girlfriend that night on our first date, and I of course said yes. Greg told me I was so mature for my age and not like any of the other girls. You know, all the usual bullshit these types of predators spout. He also told me not to tell anyone about us because they wouldn't understand, and when I told him I already knew that, he told me that was a sign we were soulmates. I again ate it up. Greg told me he was a businessman, which I blindly believed. Turned out his business was just him being a drug dealer and in a gang. He didn't really seem like the type because his appearance wasn't scruffy, but he told me everything when we known each other for about 4 months. I felt like I was falling in love with him at this point though, and I told myself I could change him and I could make him abandon that life for the straight and narrow. He drove a fancy car, and he had his own place, and he wore nice watches and clothes. I just thought he was so cool, and I really idolized him in my head. Greg knew I was a virgin, and he didn't exactly pressure me into anything, but he'd make some weird comments that flew over my head at the time. We'd talk on the phone late at night sometimes, even on my school nights. Sometimes he'd make comments about how it's so hard being with a virgin because he has to get himself off. I used to feel guilty when he said that, but I didn't realize he was being weird and telling me that. He would also complain that sometimes he wanted me, and he felt like he couldn't have me fully, which also made me feel weird. A few times he literally quizzed me about sex, and the illusion broke, and I felt like I was a child being interrogated by an adult. He asked me if I knew how to do it, which I obviously did, and he asked me how long I'd make him wait. I felt really embarrassed, and he saw it, because he then started telling me that he loved me and that he'd wait forever for me if he had to. Looking back, I guess he pressured me in some more subtle ways instead of outright demanding that I have sex with him. After knowing him for 6 months, I told my parents I was having a sleepover at my friend's house. I slept over there lots of times, so they weren't suspicious. The truth was that I was going to stay overnight at Greg's, and I knew what would happen. I guess deep down I knew something was wrong because I couldn't relax. As soon as I arrived, Greg just started kissing me, and he didn't even greet me with words. Literally, as soon as he opened the door, he pulled me inside and started making out with me. He didn't pull away, and he looked at me as he undressed me. He didn't talk to me at all. I wanted it to be special, but he didn't bother with that. Like I said, he barely even looked at me. He just pulled my clothes off too quickly as he led me to his room. I felt really vulnerable and exposed because he was fully clothed. I kept thinking that I didn't know what to do with my hands. I had them awkwardly on his back. I clearly wasn't ready for this. I couldn't even undress him because I felt awkward and it was happening so fast. He told me to go lie down, but he wasn't even looking at me. I did what he said, and he took his clothes off. I thought he would slow down now, but he didn't. He just got on me again, not even looking at me, and tried to go right to the main event. I'm really sorry if this is a bit TMI, but he really couldn't do it at first because I felt uncomfortable. I don't feel like he raped me, but I felt upset because it wasn't going how I wanted it to. I just wanted to feel like he cared about what we were doing, and I didn't feel that way at all. He kept sighing in irritation because he couldn't do it, and I started crying, which made me feel even more stupid. He then stopped, and it was like something shifted in his brain, and he suddenly became all caring all of a sudden. I told him that he was going too fast, and he said he was sorry, that he just loved me and he couldn't wait to do this with me. He was totally full of shit, but I accepted this, and I just asked him to be slower. He said he would, and he then kissed me for a few minutes before trying again. It worked, but it didn't feel good. He didn't seem to care about how I felt, but I figured something was just wrong with me. Greg wasn't fat or even extremely muscular, but he suddenly felt too heavy. Deep down, I just knew something was wrong about my relationship with him, and I think that's why I felt that way. He told me to go use the bathroom afterwards, which I did, and when I came back, he was on the phone. I felt used, but I didn't want to cause any drama or seem immature, so I just laid next to him and tried to cuddle him, but he felt stiff and didn't reciprocate. He moved his arm so I couldn't see his phone, and I just felt like crying. I felt really pathetic and needy. I thought I'd feel like a grown-up, but I just felt like shit. We laid there in silence for literally 30 minutes. I was hungry, and I had asked Greg if we could get food, and he actually told me no. In my head, I'm like, dude, what the fuck? It was at this point when he actually bothered to hug me, and he said he had a great time, and I apparently did so well. This made me cringe, and I didn't even bother saying it felt shit for me. A few more minutes had passed, and Greg just rambled on, when I had heard the front door open and shut, and then several footsteps enter the house. I froze, and I just stared at Greg, who was seemingly ignoring it. He kept talking, and I interrupted to tell him that someone just broke in. I tried to get up, but Greg pulled me into him and he said it was fine. The next thing I know, 4 guys barged into Greg's room. My blood ran cold. My heart literally sunk into my ass, and I felt like I was going to die. Greg greeted the men as if nothing weird was going on. Meanwhile, I'm vulnerable as hell trying to make sure I'm fully covered from 4 grown-ass men. I had a terrible feeling in my stomach, and I was starting to feel like I would have a panic attack. My worst fear was real, as one of the men then asked,
"Is this her then?"
As then Greg then replied yeah, before getting out of the bed still naked and unfazed. I can't say what happened next, only that one of the men took Greg's place. I kept asking Greg what the hell was going on, but he left the fucking room as the other guys were just staring at me with the most horrifying look on their faces. I felt like I was going to die. The guy then began to assault me. I couldn't shut my eyes. I couldn't move. I just stared at the corner of the ceiling and I felt sick. I ended up turning my head to the side and throwing up all over myself, and then the guy jumped off me, then screaming. All of the other guys were shouting too, but I couldn't make anything out. I was just glad that he wasn't hurting me anymore. Greg then suddenly appeared again and then said, "Geez, what the hell?" I couldn't even look at him. I was just shaking and staring at the puke next to me. I was paralyzed in fear. I was aware of Greg grabbing me and telling me to go shower, and I heard him say something like, "I don't know what's got into her. I'm sorry." Greg had a single shower that you could sit on the floor in, and I ended up doing that. I was sat in there for like 30 minutes, just sitting and sobbing quietly. The betrayal I felt was truly indescribable. I was scared to leave in case they ambushed me, but I was scared to jump out of the window without any clothes. I grabbed a towel and wrapped it around myself, so it ended up soaked with me. Greg came in and I was afraid, but he was alone and he switched the shower off. He was now dressed and he acted like nothing was wrong. He was silent, I think waiting for my reaction, but I just stayed huddled in the corner of the shower. He then finally held out his hand, which I ignored. He had the nerve to ask me what was wrong. I was speechless and I couldn't face him. I didn't want to cry in front of him. After what I'd been through, I felt like a different person in that moment. I wasn't so sensitive. I felt like something in my soul had hardened and I was numb. He turned away and he told me to get dressed. He went and got my clothes for me. I waited a long time before I dared to move. When I came out, the guys were gone and Greg was in the living room on his phone. When he saw me, he said it might be best for me to go back home since I'm not feeling well. He said that I must be coming down with a bug. I didn't even say anything. I just grabbed my overnight bag and phone and ran out into the street. I didn't stop running until I got right to my front door. I was scared to go inside in case my parents quizzed me. My head was a mess, and I just knew I had to look as horrendous as I felt. Turns out my parents were out. I looked at my phone and they had sent me a message, but I barely read it. I just went upstairs and the night was a blur. I remember throwing my clothes in a black bin bag and throwing it in the back of my wardrobe. I just sat in the bath for a really long time. I laid in bed and couldn't sleep. I replied to my parents' message with some bullshit excuse about having an upset stomach, and I said I was home from my friend's place. They bought the story and they left me alone without asking me too many questions when they got back. Greg had texted me at some point. I saw it the next day. He asked how I was doing, but I ignored him. Monday came around and I was off from school. Greg tried calling, but I didn't answer. I had volunteered on Tuesdays and Fridays, but I couldn't face going in there. I felt like everyone would know something was wrong with me. I couldn't understand why Greg and those guys did what they did. It really terrified me to know that a bunch of dudes could meet each other up and then plan to rape a young girl and all of them are fine with it. It blows my mind. I remember that Greg had showed up at my house when my parents were at work. I answered the door and he was immediately being all loving and pulling me into a hug. I shoved him so hard that he almost fell off my front step. He smiled at me and he then said in a really condescending voice, Now, there's no need for that." I felt like a kid being scolded, and honestly, that's exactly what I was, just a kid. Greg then told me that he needed to talk to me, and I know it might not make any sense to anyone, but I had to hear what he had to say. I was afraid of him, but I was heartbroken too, and just incredibly confused. I didn't let him in, he just stood at my door. He told me it was part of gang culture to show your girls to your fellows. This only made me feel worse. He was seriously trying to justify him setting me up to be abused by a group of his friends. It repulsed me. I told him I had to go, and I was about to shut my door when he then jammed his foot to stop me. He had a serious look on his face, and he told me threateningly, "Don't go crying or anything to anyone." I knew what he was trying to tell me. I told him that I had to go, and he moved his foot and he held out his arms for a hug. I hugged him and he then grabbed me and kissed me. I just wanted him to leave, and being touched by him made me feel scared. Greg kept texting me, but I didn't reply much. Whenever I did, I was very short and dry with him. He then called me one day and I answered. He asked me if I'd enjoyed our night together, and I told him it hurt and didn't feel very good. He told me that it was normal to be painful and that I just had to get used to it. I told him that I couldn't move past what his friends did and how he allowed it. He told me that it wasn't a big deal and that he didn't tell me beforehand as to not frighten me. I ended up telling him that I was hurt because my first time wasn't special. He was too rough and he let his friend assault me, and he was fine with his other friends doing it. He didn't care. I could hear my voice cracking as I said everything, and all I could say was that I was acting juvenile. He told me that he thought I was more mature, but he was wrong, and that sex isn't a big deal and it would be better the next time. I didn't know what to say, so I just made an excuse to go and I hung up. The thought of talking to him further just made me feel sick. My head was still in a mess. I was really scared because the guy who assaulted me didn't use a condom, and I was way too scared to buy a pregnancy test. Thank God my period came that month and I never ended up pregnant. I know that I should have gotten tested for STDs, but like I said, my head was a mess and I didn't know what to do. I was just so ashamed and embarrassed. I felt like I had no one to talk to because I didn't want anyone to know. I felt tainted and like I'd never be okay ever again. I couldn't trust anyone anymore, and I really hated myself for letting it happen. I tried telling myself that Greg was right and it wasn't a big deal, but I knew in my heart that wasn't true. After 2 weeks passed, Greg broke up with me over text. I felt really numb at school. All of my friends seemed so distant. I felt like I was always somewhere else, unreachable. I kept volunteering, and Greg never came back. My colleagues never noticed that he wasn't coming in anymore. I didn't tell anyone what happened until I was 22. I told my big sister, who's also a best friend to me. She was at university during all of this, so she missed it. She helped me find the courage to tell my parents, who were devastated. With the support of my family, I started therapy. I'm now 26, and I'm not saying I'm over it, but I know now that it wasn't my fault. I know others might blame me, but I was a young girl. I don't think that I deserve to be sexually abused no matter what I did or how naive I was, because no one deserves that. I want young girls to know that older men who make them feel special are predators, that women their own age don't want them because they're gross. They're only going after you because they view you as easy to manipulate. It isn't your fault. The world isn't sunshine and rainbows. But when you're a kid, that illusion shouldn't be broken the way it was for me. Greg would be in his 30s now, but whenever I Google him, nothing comes up. I have no proof of what he did to me. I know nothing about the man who was able to rape me before I threw up. I also have no idea who the other guys waiting to hurt me are or where they could be now. I regret not going to the police, but it's too late now. I really pray Greg has never done this to another girl, but I know that him and those other men probably have. Maybe someday I'll try and go to the police, but for now I'm just trying to move forward in my life. I have a hard time trusting people for obvious reasons, especially men, but I'm slowly getting better. Although my story might be more depressing than it is scary, I really hope it can serve as a warning for others to get out of this situation if you find yourself falling for a grown man's charms when you're underage. I'm telling you, nothing good will ever come of it. I'm a 27-year-old woman from Pennsylvania. The story takes place almost 10 years ago when I was 18 years old. I have never shared this with anyone besides several different therapists attempting to deal with the ongoing trauma. A little backstory. When I was a child growing up, my family was very close. My parents are divorced and I have 4 uncles on my dad's side. I was always particularly close with my Uncle Kyle, who's 13 years older than me. He was a teenager when I was a child, so I always looked up to him and I thought he was so cool. Whenever our family would get together, I would always want to sit next to him and be in his business and hang out with him. To him, I was just his annoying little niece. I would always be jealous when he would bring a different girlfriend over because I wanted his attention. Eventually, he did end up getting one of his girlfriends pregnant and having a baby girl that he named Kylie after himself. Narcissist alert. I know this might sound a little strange, but unfortunately my dad didn't give me a lot of attention growing up, so I was really craving that attention from any type of male figure that I could find. For some reason, I had latched onto my Uncle Kyle. Keep in mind, I'm a child at this point. Maybe between the ages of 8 to 10, so this is completely innocent. As I got older, things started to change between us. When I became a teenager, I started to notice him giving me a little more attention, smiling at me more, and looking at me up and down and teasing me. And it made me feel good that the cool kid I had always admired was now the one chasing after my attention. But it also felt strange. Like there was some kind of weird tension between us that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Kyle went to jail for a few years due to his involvement with drugs, and I didn't see him for a long time. When he came out, he had nowhere to go, so he moved in with my dad and he was crashing on the couch. I was also living in my dad's house at the time. I had just turned 18 and had graduated high school. I was happy he moved in, and it was really cool to be able to hang out with him again. But before long, I noticed he was acting very different towards me than ever before. He started to tease me like I remembered he would tease his girlfriends, about my height, my clothes, my hair, etc. He would message me on Facebook late at night while I was in the other room, and he kept asking me to have movie nights with him. One night I was home with nothing else to do, so I agreed. We had put on a horror movie, and my dad and stepmom had sat down to watch it with us. About halfway through the movie, my dad and stepmom had went to bed, leaving Kyle and I in the living room all alone in the dark. Before long, he had his arm all around me. This made me feel a little uncomfortable, but it wasn't a huge deal to me. He was my uncle after all. And even though he acted different towards me, I did think his behavior towards me was a little odd lately. And I never thought it would ever escalate to what was about to happen next. He looked at me, and I looked at him. And then he kissed me. 100,000 thoughts and questions were running through my head. And before I knew it, he had been kissing me for like 30 seconds. He was now on top of me, touching my breasts and trying to undo my bra. And I wasn't doing anything about it. I started to push him off me, and I said to him, "Don't you think this is wrong?" He then responded back to me with,
"It's a little weird, but it's okay."
I was scared and almost paralyzed by shock and disgust. I didn't know what else to say, so I just told him, "I'm on my period. I can't go any further." He led me up, and I then ran down the stairs and jumped onto my bed. I was in shock, so I just stared at the wall. I then heard him come down the stairs, and he climbed into the bed with me and tried to cuddle with me. And he then asked me,
"Are you mad at me?"
Was he fucking serious? I just told him I was really tired, hoping he would go away, and he did. He went back upstairs to the couch. That was the last conversation I ever had with them. I stared at the wall all night long. I was disgusted with myself, and I blamed myself. I told myself I shouldn't have been so nice to him. He probably mistook it for flirting. That I probably led him on. This is completely my fault. Then my thoughts got darker. I would look in the mirror and almost throw up. I said to myself, "You made out with your uncle, you sick, disgusting piece of crap." I fell into a deep depression. I lost my job, my car got repossessed, I cut off all of my hair, and I started smoking weed and cigarettes and stealing alcohol. Anything to get my mind off of what happened. It had haunted me every day, but I never told anyone because I was so ashamed. It took me a long time to realize that that was all a trauma response. It was not my fault. I never flirted with him. I had a close relationship to my uncle, and it's not my fault that he perceived that relationship as sexual. He's a sick man. That strange tension that I was feeling before turned out to be sexual tension coming from him. That's wrong. He groomed me and he made me feel safe, and then he pounced on me. He took away so many years of peace. What makes it worse is after I moved out of my dad's house, I ended up eventually telling my dad what happened. Now, my dad was molested as a child himself, so I thought of all people who would understand this type of trauma, it would have been him. I was wrong. He allowed Kyle to continue living in his house and sleeping on his couch for years after I told him. I told my dad, "He sleeps on your couch, he has no job, he steals from you, and he sexually assaulted your daughter, and you still say nothing and allow him to do this?" He just says, "It's in the past. What do you want me to do?" So yeah, I've been completely on my own dealing with this for a long time. My dad also still invites him to every family function and holiday, and he then wonders why I never attend anything. I've gone to many different therapists, taking many different medications to deal with the event that happened, and I deal with the broken relationship I now have with my cold-hearted father. The only thing that has truly helped me is the time that's gone by. I can confidently say that today, I'm okay. I made it through. That doesn't mean I don't still think about it every day, but I no longer blame myself. That's the most important thing. To most of you, this is probably not a horrifying story, and yeah, it could have been worse, but this is the most traumatic thing that has ever happened to me, and it will continue to haunt me until the day I die. Kyle is now facing charges for making sexual advances at his current girlfriend's 12-year-old daughter. His girlfriend is taking his side, calling her own daughter a liar. He will never change, and I hope he rots in jail. And if they ever call me up and ask me to testify, I will tell this story to a jury. Thank you all for taking the time to listen. And please, everyone, stay safe and always listen to your gut. I'm an EMT. My partner and I got paired up by chance, being complete strangers, but became fast friends. Being EMTs in a major city, we're no strangers to situations that are hostile or outright bizarre, but this gave me a chill deep in my bones. We work in private EMS, but our truck is contracted to the city to only respond to 911 calls. We were sitting at our post one night at one of the police precincts. We parked the truck in the back of the lot by some bushes and trees so we stay out of everyone's way. At the end of the lot, a neighborhood street dead ends just before the lot begins being separated by the bushes. Being a major city, we hear multiple calls a day going out for shootings, stabbings, and assaults and more. Over the past few nights, I pronounced a few of the victims myself. This particular night, we were sitting at post, and I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. I turned to see a seemingly homeless man staring at us through the bushes. Being an EMT, I rolled down the window to ask if he was okay. He said nothing, and I asked again a little louder if he needed help, but nothing. He just disappeared into the bushes. Well, a few moments later, we received a call for a stabbing at a house on the street that dead ends at our post, a house directly behind where we saw the guy in the bushes. We arrived on the scene to find a patient stabbed to death in the house. We did our thing and then confirmed the time of death. As we were pulling off, I had just remembered the man that we had just saw. We stopped and got out to tell the primary police unit and gave them the description. As far as I know, he was never caught. In the late 90s and early 2000s, my grandfather was a police officer. We live in a small town where not much goes on. The occasional drug bust, but nothing ever this crazy. My grandfather was on patrol when he noticed a vehicle swerving and driving recklessly. He turned on his lights and pulled the van over. When he approached the window, he stated his name and why he pulled the two Hispanic men over. He then told them that they were driving recklessly and they also had a brake light out. When he told them this, the passenger of the vehicle spoke up and he asked if he could open the rear hatch and see if he could fix the light. My grandfather, being a mechanic, agreed to look at it, but said that he first needed to run the driver's license and insurance. When he stated the name of the driver to dispatch, the woman on the other end very frantically said to stay in your vehicle until backup arrives. A few minutes later, backup arrived and they searched the vehicle. The two men were brought out of the back and both were armed with shotguns. He didn't see them because they had blocked the windows on both sides of the van. It turned out that they were transporting drugs down from Mexico into the States. I will be leaving out some specific details such as exact dates, names, and locations to protect both mine and my family's privacy. Also, I simply don't know every specific detail and circumstance, as the story isn't mine specifically. It's actually my dad's from before I was born, back when he was a young cop, and he doesn't talk about it or really any of his stories very much. He shared some of his experiences with me almost a decade ago after I'd gotten back from my first deployment, and he hasn't talked about it much since. I can safely say that he wouldn't mind me sharing this story as long as I keep certain personal details private, because it may help people better understand the nature of things many of those in law enforcement have to deal with. I'll share just this one for now, and maybe in the future I'll share some more either from his or my own experiences. Also, please note that I put this together from not just what I remember my dad telling me, but also from local newspaper articles, as well as some of his old cassette tapes that contain the radio transmissions from that night. With that being said, here's a little background info. Like I said, my dad served as a police officer for nearly 30 years. During that time, he did everything from being a regular beat cop to SWAT/SRT, including as a sniper or sharpshooter as some call it, working undercover with the drug task force as well as some other things. This particular story takes place back in the early 90s late at night in the rural Midwest. I'm talking about a town with a few thousand people surrounded by rural farmland, and a few even smaller towns of a couple hundred. As many of you who are from such areas know, everybody knows everybody, and a lot of meth is made and distributed in places like this due to the seclusion and abundance of the chemicals needed for its manufacture. This area was no different. In particular, there were two brothers that were heavily involved in the local meth trade. For the sake of this story, I'll call them John and Mike Smith. Over the years, John especially developed a reputation for violent behavior, and he probably suffered from some sort of mental illness as well. In addition to dealing meth, he was known to beat and verbally abuse his girlfriend, and at one point held some members of his family at gunpoint and threatened to kill himself. Both brothers were constantly in and out of jail, and at the time of this story were both on probation, and one of the stipulations was that they weren't allowed to be around each other. At some point, one of them had acquired a Tech-9 pistol. The rumor around town was that they had illegally filed down the sear so that the pistol could fire full auto. Also, a couple of days prior to the story taking place, Mike had bought several rounds of 9mm from a local sporting goods store. Now, the night of the story, my dad was out on patrol on his motorcycle. Earlier, they had gotten reports that John and Mike were out and about driving around together. As I mentioned earlier, they weren't supposed to be together. Well, at some point that night, my dad does indeed spot them driving around together, and he proceeds to call it in and attempts to pull them over. As soon as he lights them up, though, these two take the fuck off and he gives chase. During the chase, my dad actually sounded pretty calm over the radio as he relayed the situation. He chased them to Mike's house, and the two got out of the car and tried to run inside. John made it up the front porch and in the front door. Mike, however, wasn't as fast, and my dad was able to grab Mike on the front porch before he could get inside. My dad is behind Mike trying to subdue him, and they're fighting on the front porch. John then comes back out the front door holding the Tech-9. At this point, both the sides of my dad's and Mike's bodies are facing John. John then pointed the gun at my dad's head. Luckily, he sees John out of the corner of his eye, as well as the muzzle of the gun, maybe just over a foot from his head. Without thinking, just completely on instinct, my dad is able to turn Mike in front of John, ducking his head behind Mike's body, pulling out his pistol, aims it over Mike's shoulder, and then quickly squeezes a round off towards John. John immediately collapsed to the ground, and my dad was able to take Mike to the ground and cuff him. My dad radioed shots fired, and that one suspect was now down. I remember that he sounded out of breath and he wasn't yelling or even freaking out into the radio, but that he was talking louder, and you could tell he was stressed out for lack of better terms, but still kept his composure. Soon backup arrived, and of course, being a shooting in a small town, it didn't really take long for word to get around. John's family tried to claim my dad had murdered him, and of course the entire incident had to be investigated. During the investigation, one of John's friends tried to claim that he saw my dad drunk at the local bar bragging about how he shot John. The thing is, everyone that knew my dad knew that he didn't even drink and had actually never drank in his life. In fact, it was a joke among his friends that they loved to jokingly give him crap about it every so often. Plus, no one corroborated the story, so that claim didn't hold any water. After the investigation, the shooting was found to be indeed justified. Of course, John's friends and family didn't like that. I suppose it's hard to accept sometimes that the people you care about aren't always the greatest of people and bring their own demise on themselves. Maybe it's easier to live in denial. I don't know. I'm not them, and I haven't lived the same lives and experiences that they have. Hell, like I said, I wasn't even alive at the time this all went down. Regardless, they decided to order and give out some bumper stickers that said, "Remember John Smith," and the local paper released an article about the investigation finding the shooting to be justified. In the article, they had a picture of both my dad and John. Both of them were in their late 20s at the time. My dad is 6'4" tall with the classic cop mustache, and at the time he was around 220 pounds of muscle. He had always had a passion for fitness, and was a former state champion high hurdler, and he received a full-ride D1 track scholarship before becoming a police officer. The paper made sure to use a picture of him in uniform that of course not only highlighted all of those physical characteristics, but also showed him with the most serious facial expression they could find. John, on the other hand, was average height, probably around 5'10" or so. Even though, like my dad, he was in his late 20s, since he had used meth and other drugs most of his life, he was very thin with emaciated skin. He had unkempt, matted, oily hair. Most of his teeth were either gone or rotted out, and he usually looked dirty and disheveled. The paper, of course, made sure to use his old high school senior picture, taken around a decade prior, with him smiling so happily. Mike ended up going to prison. Years later, after he got out, he said he was going to kill my dad and then himself. However, he died of a heart attack or something, and he never made good on his threat. My dad retired from the force after almost 30 years. For a few years afterward, he seemed kind of bummed out. Even though he didn't like the internal politics of being a police officer, he loved the job itself. He eventually moved to a new city, and today he works at a halfway house where he serves as a counselor and he runs a program for veteran residents with PTSD. Since he started doing that, you can really tell that he got his sense of purpose back. He says that his favorite part is not only seeing their progress, but overcoming the inevitable setbacks along the way. Many of them still come to talk to him years later and thank him for seeing the potential in them when no one, including themselves, ever did, as well as giving them the tools to help them turn their lives around. I've even met some of them myself, and they've told me similar things. You can tell the residents there seem to have a certain respect for him and a few of the other people who work there. Sort of like a father figure or an older sibling that they never had kind of vibe. What's really interesting is he said if it wasn't for his time and experience as a cop, he wouldn't have been able to relate to and understand many of the people he counseled. When he was a rookie cop, his field training officer told him, "Most of the so-called bad people you'll have to deal with throughout your career are actually really good people who just made some really bad decisions. You will encounter people that are truly evil, but they are the exception, not the rule." He said that really stuck with him, and he always reminds himself of that. Stay safe out there, everyone. When I was in high school, I discovered a stolen car which I reported to the police, and it could have led to something worse. Every day when I got home from school, I would head upstairs and use the bathroom up there since my room was up there as well. Being on the second floor, I never had a shade or curtain on this bathroom window. It was a routine I would just do without giving it much thought. I would go up, do my business, and glance out at the window. From the window, I could see the backyard and over our fence to a parking lot of some nearby apartments. One day when I happened to glance out the window, I noticed a car sitting at the far end of the parking lot with the driver's side window down. This was odd to me, as it had just snowed heavily the night before, and the snow covered the car completely except for the open window. I laughed to myself, thinking maybe it was just an older car and the window was either broken or didn't work, or someone who parked it there might have been drunk and forgot to roll it up. Many thoughts went through my mind about all the possible reasons it would be wide open like that during the winter. I eventually put it out of my mind. After several days, I noticed the car hadn't moved and the window was still open. I sensed something was off, and I had the idea the car had been stolen and dumped there. Deciding to be a good Samaritan, I wrote down the make, model, and license plate number, and I brought it to my high school police liaison officer. The office of the liaison officer was nothing more than a custodian's closet with a windowed door. The window had been covered in black construction paper for privacy of the students or staff that needed to discuss matters with the officer. When I brought the information about the car to him, I remembered having to wait as he was in some meeting with a student at the time and he didn't answer my knocks. I had to go to my class, so I handed the information off to a friend who said they could get it to the officer later on. Later that day, I was called to the foyer and I was met with a liaison officer and a uniformed officer. It turned out the car was reported stolen, and the uniformed officer was there so that I could go with him to show him where the car was. I was excused from school, and I rode with the officer to my neighborhood and then showed him the car. After filling out my information with the officer, I was then brought back to school by the police liaison officer who met up with us later. This is when things could have gone bad for me. For some background context, I'll tell you that I've always had some suspicions about the liaison officer. Well, before I brought the stolen car information in, I witnessed the school's officer being overly friendly with students, and many liked him and joked around with him. He would say things like, "If you went camping and woke up with your butt hurting, would you tell anyone?" At this point and other so-called jokes, students who really liked him would laugh him off like he was just one of the guys joking around and having a good time, even if the jokes were inappropriate. I just felt there was something off about him. but since many students liked him and seemed to vouch for him, I shrugged it off. "So, what do you have planned this weekend?" he asked me when driving me back to school. I remember being nervous, as I'm usually a shy person, and I gave him a serious but ridiculous answer. I told him I was getting an oil change done on my car. He laughed at this, and he said I must have more fun things planned other than that. I laughed too, but I didn't really have any plans that weekend, and I didn't elaborate. He then offered to buy me lunch from a fast food place a block away from school many high schoolers like to flock to when they have off-campus lunch. At the time, I thought it was maybe some kind of reward for finding the stolen car and reporting it. I think that he was trying to groom me with the offer of food and being friendly that day. Several months after reporting the car, news broke out that the liaison officer had been caught sexually abusing a couple of male students on campus. Word had gotten out that he had paid the students to do sexual acts and that there were VHS tapes involved. I heard he had tried to hand over the evidence to his brother to destroy, but his brother looked at one of the tapes and then immediately turned him over to the authorities. Regardless of the facts, he was found guilty of several counts of sexual abuse and sentenced to prison. My instincts of being suspicious of him were right. Thinking back on the car ride to school with him, I can't help but think that he would have done something to me. What if he did try something and I refused? Would he have threatened to arrest me or something? Blame the stolen car on me? Force me to do something at gunpoint? The black construction paper over the window of his office door might have been put up to hide the criminal acts happening on the other side. In any case, I'm glad that nothing ever happened to me. I feel bad for the students who were abused, and I really hope they're doing okay these days. This goes to show that sometimes you never really know a person, and sometimes people that are supposed to protect you are just not as they seem. I'm a female, and all this happened when I just graduated from college and moved to France to work. I didn't know the language, and I worked night shifts in an international hotel in one of the safest areas of the city I lived in. On one night, I had to borrow a car while mine was in the shop being repaired. The only available replacement car was a white van, like the ones used for moving or that the post delivery drivers have. Thinking nothing of it, I took it and I made my way to work. That night went smoothly, and nothing was amiss. However, on my way home, I saw flashing blue lights behind me. As I mentioned, I live in a safe area, so I just guessed that my van had a broken light or something. Odd for a replacement car, but it happens, I guess. I got pulled over just before a residential area, meaning we were still in the darkness aside from a street lamp very far away. As a new driver and eager to obey the law, I opened my window fully and took out my driver's license while I waited on the police officer to come to me. However, the man who approached me was wearing civilian's clothing. I guessed he was just an officer out of his uniform and greeted him politely. This man seemed surprised to see me, and he didn't identify himself. Huge red flag, I know. But back then, I was really naive and stupid. He said something in French, but I unfortunately didn't understand, and I asked him if he knew English. He repeated himself, and he asked where I was headed. I assumed this was a generic question, and I answered I was heading home. He then asked where I lived and seemed even more surprised to hear the location as I lived quite far away from my workplace. He then questioned about where I worked as well, seeming a little nervous. I answered, thinking I was complying with the law. The whole interaction didn't even take 2 minutes, so of course I didn't think that his questions were inappropriate. He didn't even ask to see my license, and he fell silent for a moment before poking his head through my driver's window and looking behind me at the empty van. He seemed unsettled by the lack of discovery of anything suspicious, and he just told me to go home. On the ride back, I thought he was an undercover cop that was probably on the lookout for a similar looking car, and he thought he had found it. Now, this situation seemed normal in my mind for a while, and I thought nothing of it. Until one day I was telling my coworkers about my experience and laughing. They stared me dead in the eye and told me that white vans were usually used by prostitutes and they offered their services in the back. The man that stopped me might have been a cop, but he might have been a man pretending to be a cop, seeking to take advantage of a sex worker. But when he saw that I didn't speak any French and that I didn't match the usual description of one of them, he took a peek into my van to double check, and then seeing that there was no mattress back there, he backed off. Needless to say, I was terrified. He really could have been a cop, but I can't help but wonder what would have happened if he wasn't, and if he really did want to take advantage of some poor girl. I no longer open my windows entirely whenever I'm pulled over, and I make sure the person stopping me is actually a police officer before engaging in conversation, and I no longer drive a white van. The story takes place from June 2008 to May 2009. For safety reasons, I'm going to call my ex Caesar. I was 19 years old at the time, and I was sharing an apartment with my mom. The complex next to mine, which coincidentally I now live in, was doing some remodeling. They were having roofers come in to start with re-roofing the buildings, and this is how I met my ex. I was on my way down to the gas station to get a pack of cigarettes. When he noticed me, he had asked me for my number. That was what little English he could speak. I knew some Spanish, and I gave him my number. He texted me, and I had translated my text from English to Spanish so that we could accommodate his struggles with learning the English language. I learned that he was 25 years old and he was from Mexico, but that he had relocated here to make some money to send home to his 4-year-old daughter. We started a relationship really quickly, even though there was a language barrier. Everything seemed to go well for the first couple of months. I started to notice that he would be texting someone, and his text message to her was "mi amor," which I understood to mean my love. He also had pictures of her saved in his phone. I had started to question their relationship, and he told me that she was just his friend. Things were getting pretty serious between us, and he had met all of my family. He had also bought me a ring, sort of a promise ring, and I would wear it every day. One weekend he was over and one of my friends had come up that I hadn't seen in over a year. She got upset by something I was doing, and she asked me if I could talk with her privately. So we went into my room to talk, and she was yelling about something. Well, my ex then came into the room and he told me he was leaving. I then proceeded to follow him, trying to understand why, and all he kept saying was that I was cheating on him and that he had heard me doing things with her in the room, which wasn't anywhere near the truth. He then insisted that I get into his car, and we argued the entire time. He then grabbed my ring that he gave me, literally pulling it off my finger and threw it. He ended up dropping me back off at my apartment and driving away. I was devastated. Then he started trying to call me to apologize, but I told him that I didn't want to talk to him. About an hour later, a bomb was dropped on me. Some girl calls me saying that she's his wife, and it turns out to be the same girl in the pictures on his phone. I didn't hear from him for a few weeks. Sometime after that, he had texted me telling me that it was actually his friend, and that they were just pretending that it was his wife because he wanted to upset me and that he wanted to come over. So I took him back. It was also my birthday around this time, so he took me out to dinner. I was turning 20, and it was a pretty big deal for me because I was no longer a teenager. We ended up hooking up earlier in the morning before going out to eat, but then out of nowhere, right after we hooked up, he then told me that he didn't want to be with me anymore, and he was breaking up with me on my birthday. It didn't last long though, and before long, he had once again asked for another chance, which I gave him. In hindsight, I just had really low self-esteem, and I didn't want to be single. It was Christmas of 2008, and he had came over to celebrate Christmas with us because he didn't have any family of his own in the US. We welcomed him with open arms, got him gifts and everything. On Christmas Eve, my family had a tradition where we would go to church at night, and I had asked him to come to church with us, but he refused. He wanted to get drunk instead. When I came home later that night, he was acting very weird, and he told me he was going to go see the girl that was supposedly his friend, but also his ex. I told him that if he left, there wouldn't be any other chances, and it would be over for good. He still left. After he left, he had made multiple attempts to call me. At this time, I didn't have a cell phone because my finances were really tight and I couldn't afford to refill my phone, so I just had a landline. Well, he called, and he left a bunch of very angry messages because I wasn't answering. It was now December 31st. My brother-in-law's birthday was the night before, so we had to celebrate his birthday at my apartment. My brother-in-law and sister was sleeping off their drunken stupor, and I hadn't been feeling very well, so I didn't partake in the activities. Not to mention, I had to go to work on New Year's Eve. It was probably around 5 a.m., maybe 6 a.m., and there was a knock at the door. My brother-in-law answered, and he told me that it was my ex at the door wanting to talk to me. I told him that I'd be back, and that we were going to go talk in his car. I got in his car to talk, and he asked if I'd go to the 24-hour grocery store with him to go get some cigarettes. Side note, I live right near the freeway. When you leave my complex and you turn right, and then you make another right, you can go left to get to the grocery store, or you can turn right, which is right where the freeway on-ramp is. I knew that something was wrong when he didn't go left and got on the freeway. I have asthma, and I had started lying, telling him that I was having an asthma attack to try and do anything I could to get him to pull over and let me out of the car. He kept telling me that I was cheating on him, even though we had broken up, and every time I tried to deny it, he would just swerve towards other cars. I ended up agreeing with him because I thought it was safer for me to lie and just tell him what he wanted to hear. It didn't take me long to realize that the cup holder in his car had an open bottle of beer. Looking in the back seat, there was an empty 18-pack of beer and a freshly opened pack missing one beer. It then began to dawn on me just how much danger I was actually in. We passed several state troopers along the way, and not a single one of them pulled us over. At one point, we were passing by the curve that also overlooks the lake, and he told me that he wanted to crash the car into the lake. That way we could be together forever. My mom woke up in a panic and had asked my sister where I was, and my sister told her that I went outside to talk to my ex. She immediately put on her shoes and then went outside. She then began to panic even more when she realized his car wasn't outside anymore. She called the police immediately, telling them she was scared that something very bad has happened to me. She called my ex, but all he said was that I was sleeping, and that's why she couldn't talk to me. All while he had his hand over my mouth the entire time. He then told her that I wouldn't be around anymore in broken English. She, of course, relayed all of this information to the police. The police brought on a translator to try and talk him into letting me go, but he wasn't staying on the phone with the police. He hung up on them. We've now been driving about half an hour when he then decided to stop for gas and cigarettes. We had stopped at a 7-Eleven and I had to go to the bathroom. I hadn't gone to the bathroom yet that morning, and he told me that after we stopped at the 7-Eleven, he would actually bring me back home. Before I got out of the car to see about using the bathroom, he had put a knife up to my throat, and he told me that if I tried to ask for help, he would kill me. I went into the store to find out that they didn't have any public bathrooms. He told me he was going to bring me home, so I had no choice but to get back into the car with him. But instead of hopping on the freeway to go north, he had hopped on the freeway to go south, the opposite way of where I live. While we were in the car, he then told me that he was taking me to his friend's house instead, and he pretty much told me in detail that they had plans to kill me and then hide my body so that no one would ever find it. After an hour, I had begged him to stop at a rest stop so I could use the bathroom. He told me he would bring me back home after we left the rest stop. I went to the bathroom while he was in his car smoking, and I had no choice but to get back in the car with him. At this point, I'm about an hour away from home and it's winter. But I live in a place that primarily gets rain during the winter, so there wasn't any snow, but it was very cold. I was expecting it to be quick, so I didn't put on a jacket and I just had flip-flops on. I was just wearing PJs and flip-flops and nothing else. I got back in the car, and he then told me that he was now leaving me at the rest stop. I had started panicking at this point because I didn't know what to do, but I noticed that there was a payphone nearby. I didn't have any identification or money on me, but I knew that I could place a collect call. Once I saw him pull away, I then ran to the payphone and called my house. My brother-in-law was still a little drunk, and he couldn't drive safely. So I was pretty much stranded at a rest area an hour away from my home. I was supposed to be at work, but my mom had called my work and let them know what was going on. And since my mom and I worked at the same place, she had told her boss that until I was home safe, she wasn't coming in either. After talking on the phone with my sister, I had called the police from the payphone and told them the rest stop I was at. While I was on the phone with them and telling them what happened and that I was stranded and that I had no way to get back, my ex then pulled back around at the rest stop. Now, there were 3 directions you could go. One that led to the freeway, one that led to a different parking lot, and then one that would loop back around to the parking lot that I was in. I saw him pull up and I started panicking, telling the dispatcher that he was back. She wanted me to stay on the line with her, but he had grabbed the payphone out of my hand and then hung it up. She told me that the police were on their way before I hung up on her. He then tried pulling me into his car, but I started making noise, hoping there was someone who would hear me. Sure enough, I then got the attention of a groundskeeper who had just come to make sure that all of the facilities were clean. He immediately approached while everything was taking place and asked if I needed help. My ex got paranoid and then jumped back into his car and left. I told the guy that the police were on their way, and he stayed with me until the police came. I had told the state trooper everything that happened, and he had called the police in town just to confirm that I was telling the truth. Turns out I was 2 whole counties away from my home. The county police also showed up, and they got special permission to transport me to the next county over, where an officer from my county would then meet them to transport me home. Before they took me home, the officer, who was really nice, asked if she could take me to the fire station so that I could warm up and then she could take a statement of everything that happened. We sat down in the station and she had turned on a videotape recorder, recording my statement of everything that happened from start to finish. Then she took me home afterwards. She had called my mom on the way there just to let her know I was safe and that she was about to pull up with me. My mom threw her arms around me and gave me the biggest hug, and I just broke down crying. She knew that something was wrong. She had a nightmare that he killed me. I guess you could call it mother's intuition that she knew that I wasn't safe and that I was in a dangerous situation. My sister convinced me to still go to work, saying that she thought it would be good for me to have a distraction. So my brother-in-law brought both me and my mom to work, and I actually did work the entire day. After we got off work, we were waiting for our ride. My mom had damaged her knee slipping on ice, so we would take specialized transportation through the bus company, and I would also come with her as her companion rider. We were standing outside the building, and to give you some context on how this is set up, it's a business park, so there's a building I work in, a building across the street, and then a building to the left. There's a little parking lot in between the building to the left and the building in the front. I had noticed a car sitting in a caddy corner pointed directly at my building. I told my mom that I felt like it was just really off, and we decided to step inside since it was secure access and you couldn't get in the building without a badge. Sure enough, as soon as I stepped inside and the door closed, he had whipped his car around, and it was my ex, who then immediately sped off. We had called the police, and due to the fact that we were waiting on the police, the transportation couldn't stay, so they left without taking us. The police eventually came, and we had told them the situation, and I had to re-explain everything that happened earlier that day. We ended up calling my brother-in-law, and he and my sister picked up my mom and I and brought us both home. About a week later, I got a call from a detective who had been assigned to my case. After doing some digging, there was apparently another girl that was linked to him that had disappeared. Like there was a whole missing person report on her and everything, and he was initially a suspect, but they had no proof of anything, so they let him go. It turned out that he had not only lied about his name, but he had lied about his age. He wasn't 25, he was 35. Right around that time, I noticed that I was also still feeling really sick. I had been sick for nearly a whole week, so I had made an appointment with the doctor. Well, I got the worst news I could possibly get at that time. They told me I was pregnant. My situation ended up getting a whole lot dangerous from there. I had to do everything I could to hide my pregnancy because he was now stalking me. He would randomly show up where I was at. I would call the police, but he'd always be gone before the police got there. Luckily, I didn't really start to show until around my 20-week scan. I knew that it wouldn't be safe for me to keep my baby because he kept showing up, so I made the painful decision to give him up for adoption. I just knew that I needed to protect him. My sister had also been struggling for a long time with her own fertility, so I let her adopt him. I was about 21 weeks pregnant, and he had showed up in my apartment late at night pounding on my door and windows. But once again, he was always gone before the police got there. The police had us contact the domestic violence shelter who contacted police transport, and they had also brought us to a hotel that they paid for. We returned back to my apartment the next day, and everything was fine for a couple of weeks. I had a domestic violence protection order hearing in place, and the detective on my case had his address, so they sent it there, hoping that he would show up at the court because they planned to arrest him. Of course, he didn't show up, but the judge granted the protection order anyway because of the circumstances of my case. 2 weeks later, he and the girl that he had planned to bring me to so that they could kill me showed up at our apartment in the middle of the night. We could see them outside our window trying to see if they could open the window from the outside. At this point, we realized that it wouldn't be safe for us to stay in that apartment. So we called the police, and the police came, but once again, arriving way too late. My sister and her husband drove 3 hours to our apartment, and they told us to pack whatever we could pack and then went back to their place. We ultimately decided to just move in with them for the safety of me, my mom, and my sister's unborn child, since I was now showing and very obviously pregnant. The detective on my case would stay in touch with me, and in July 2009, they told me that my ex had gone into the police station not too far from where I was currently living and had turned himself into the police. He was extradited to the jail in town that I was living in and currently live in, and he was given a slap on the wrist. He was put into jail for 150 days before being deported back to Mexico. My sister didn't feel right adopting the baby since my ex had been deported, so I had planned to keep my son, but due to the trauma that I suffered from everything that I went through with his father, I just couldn't bond with him. I love him, but I couldn't bond with him. He was the spitting image of his father, and every time I would look at him, I would see his father. My sister did ultimately end up adopting my son because she fell in love with him immediately and was already being more of a mother to him than me. It's been 15 years, and talking about it still makes me cry. I now have the privilege of knowing my son, who will be 15 soon. He knows what happened and why I gave him up for adoption. We have a really close relationship, and we talk every single day. It still really scares me that my ex might come back one day. After everything he put me through, I want nothing more than for him to burn in hell. Ladies, remember that if someone shows you their red flags early on, to believe those red flags and to not always believe in the best in people. Your life just may depend on it. Don't get into a car with a crazy ex. Even if they were never physically violent before, you have no idea what someone is truly capable of. Anyone can show you their true colors at any moment. Just keep that in mind. And please be careful out there. I had dated a creepy guy that turned out to be a murderer. As a teenager, I had waited couples in a local restaurant to pay for the gas for my car. That's where I met Mr. Creep. In my naive mind, he seemed normal at first, despite the fact that he was 20 and wanting to date a 17-year-old. Leaving my job after dark had really scared me, so I had taught myself to get in my car, shut the door, and then lock it in one fluid motion. It made me feel safe. One night as I was leaving work and had just gotten into my car, Mr. Creep just seemed to appear out of nowhere, yanking my door handle to try and open it. I looked in his eyes in the split second before he smiled, and what I saw absolutely chilled my bones. I don't know how else to describe the evil that I saw. From then on, I was terrified of him, but I didn't let on because I was afraid of what he might do if I ever told him that I never wanted to see him again. After this, he constantly tried to impress me, and he had tried to invent ways of being alone with me, but my instinct was to run, so I avoided him. So, about 2 weeks after this incident, the restaurant actually got robbed, and there was significant evidence against Mr. Creep that he was the one that did it, just not the kind that allowed the cops to charge him. I had sent all of my text conversations with Mr. Creep to the police chief, just in hopes that it would help. Mr. Creep had slowly slithered away after that, but I always looked over my shoulder nonetheless. About 5 years ago, he had messaged me on Facebook out of the blue. He had went on about his top secret military clearance as well as a huge acreage that he owned. It made me nervous and I felt like he was trying to spring a trap on me or something, but I just tried to put it out of my mind. Then today, I was looking at the news and I had seen a post about an unsolved murder when I saw his mugshot. He's now facing murder charges as well as 2 other violent felony charges. Don't get me wrong, I'm so glad to know that he's locked up, but I'm also so overwhelmed about how correct my instincts about him were. I'm really glad that I escaped him. When I was 14, I had my first relationship. I'll refer to this person as H. H had loved the outdoors and would walk along a secluded path that led to a bit of a cliff. I don't know how else to describe it. The story is a little short, but one afternoon we were walking up there. It was the place that we went to for privacy, and so that H could smoke and drink alcohol. He was pretty rebellious, while I was not. When we reached the top, we were doing what we usually did. The area was extremely secluded, and H had started telling me to jump off the cliff and into the water below. The path was hilly, so underneath us it was rocks and kind of like a stream and a lot of bushes and trees and things of that nature. I obviously said no, but H just kept encouraging me to do it. It creeped me out because if I jumped down, I would most definitely die, or at least be seriously injured. H had told me that he had done it before, and that I should do it too. This had to be a lie, and I just kept saying no. But H just kept on telling me to do it, and he even tried to shove me off at one point. We had a huge argument, and I ended up walking off, but I was really scared to turn my back on H fully because they had actually attempted to push me off prior. H gave me the silent treatment for refusing to jump off, and every time I think back to this experience, it really unnerves me. We had actually stayed together after this incident, and H started to do other weird stuff. They would do things like trying to set my hair on fire and tried to set fires on that secluded path too. When I was 18, I found out that they were arrested for domestic violence. They literally began beating someone in public and had the police called. It really scares me to think back to that cliff incident. I really think H was trying to kill me. I know it sounds dramatic, but why else would they have wanted me to jump off like that? I mean, combined with everything else, it really creeps me out all these years later. I came across your channel sometime before the pandemic, but right at the height of the lockdown, I became a lifelong fan. I've been wanting to share my story, but I've been a bit hesitant since the issue is still ongoing. Some years ago, when I was a teen, I was hospitalized for an eating disorder. While staying at the facility, I was given a roommate whose issues were a little different than mine. Her name is Jessie, but she likes to go by what she refers to as her artist name. She was not shy about it, and very quick to tell me that she was in for meth use. Somehow she was convinced that she was there by mistake, only because her mom had forced her. The entire time we were there, she tried convincing everyone she could that doing meth recreationally and living out of your car was the best thing a person could do. As time went on, I would wake up in the middle of the night with the eerie feeling of being watched, only to find her sitting up straight in bed staring at me in the dark. Eventually, I gathered the courage to ask her why she was doing that, and she would tell me that it was because she thought I was so pretty. This made me extremely uncomfortable, and I gently told her about how this made me feel. Her demeanor toward me immediately changed. She would still stare at me at night, but now with pure hatred. In this facility, if you did well enough, you were given the privilege of caring for small pets. Because I had raised fish before, I decided to help with the care of the facility's fish, and I was even given permission to keep a beautiful betta in my room. This did not last for long, because after I had told Jessie that her staring made me uncomfortable, I woke up one morning to find the fish dead. I had a suspicion it was her, and that was confirmed when I caught her smiling at me as I had told the nurses through sobs about my dead fish. I requested a room change and explained my situation. Thankfully, the nurses were receptive and I was able to switch rooms. For the remainder of my stay, Jessie profusely apologized and begged me to forgive her, claiming that I was her only friend and she didn't want to lose touch when we left the facility. Fast forward some time and I'm on my own and in recovery, and I decided to start a YouTube channel repurposing old dolls. Jessie finds me again and she shares with me her plot to pretend to be Trisha Paytas when Trisha was pretending to have DID. For those who don't know, Trisha Paytas is a very famous YouTuber. Well, when I refused to get involved in the drama, Jessie began a hate campaign against me, accusing everyone calling her out of being me. She claims I'm jealous of her and her fame. Spoiler alert, she's been mumble rapping for over a decade, and when legitimate musicians try to give her feedback or constructive criticism, she bullies them. Other notable mentions are, she makes fun of people struggling with addictions, she mocks people with DID, even claimed her altars were formed by magic. She has killed numerous pets due to negligence, including a hamster she had for less than a month when she had took him out of his cage on a cold day, prompted him to go into torpor and then threw him away saying he was dead. She also left another hamster unsupervised on a picnic table while she mumble rapped for YouTube, and the little guy ended up falling and breaking his neck. She also took one of her disabled dogs on a walk without a leash, and when the puppy fell into a lake and almost drowned, she decided to film herself for YouTube panicking and screaming about her dog, but not doing anything to try and save it. She claims to be indigenous, but when indigenous people questioned her and genealogists posted her family tree and debunked that lie, she silenced and blocked anyone else who tried to hold her accountable. She has a bad habit of stealing others' traumas and then telling the story as her own, including a kidnapping and assault that someone shared during group therapy. The cherry on top is that she actually admitted to protecting a pedophile while they dated, and she only exposed him for revenge when he kicked her out because she was physically abusive towards him, something she's known for doing anyone near her. She's been physically abusive towards everyone in her life, including her own mother and her US veteran stepfather. She's currently pregnant by that same pedophile, though she claims he's not the father, and I genuinely really fear for that poor baby, given her history of violence and pet death toll. I've since removed all of my social media accounts for a few years, but I still see her bully others, accuse them of being me, and hate spam others, including using my very own trauma of surviving a pedophile father as ammunition for defamation. My heart goes out to her mother and her stepfather, and that poor unborn baby who didn't ask to be brought into this world by such a selfish and completely self-absorbed psychopath who could very easily cause physical harm to the infant just because she was obsessed with having an Asian baby. Jesse, you are not well. You need professional help. Please heal yourself once and for all, and keep my name out of your toxic mouth. If you actually had any talent, your music career would have soared by now. Instead, it's been over 10 years of people telling you to get lessons. I only pray that you're a better mother than you are a singer, or even a person for that matter. Thank you all for listening. This incident happened back in 2014 when I was last committed to a psych ward for a suicide attempt. A little background. I'm a female and I was 19 at the time. I was coming off 3 years of bipolar medication while at peak of substance abuse, facilitated by my first year in college going crazy with new adult freedom. One night I had a big mental episode and was committed for the first time in the adult ward. Previously, I'd been admitted in the minors ward during my adolescence for similar episodes. Within this unit, you had to share a room with the same sex, but weren't given any proper introductions. The facility as a whole wasn't managed effectively, nor did any of the nurses or doctors seem to care other than to prescribe and get you out. I was led to the room I was staying in, and the nurse just said to the other lady in the room, "This is your new roommate," and left. The woman appeared to be in her late 40s, early 50s, Hispanic, and just a tad bit taller than me. She would not keep her gaze off the floor in front of her, and she didn't say a word or move when I said hi. I noticed she had a tattoo of a cartoon version of the classic Red Devil, but as a baby. I figured I'd just leave her alone and stick to my own area of the room. The first night went as they normally do in a psych ward, with a nightly group, and my roommate declined to share anything yet again, only staring at the floor and barely moving an inch. While everyone was lining up to be given their medication before bed, the ward across began to start banging on the glass of the door and screaming. One guy was smiling while banging his bald head against the glass window part, while the guys behind him were screaming and jumping around. It seemed as if they were almost going to break through, but orderlies came and took them away with their screams still lingering through the halls. Being in psych wards before, I wasn't really surprised by out-of-the-ordinary behavior like yelling or fight starting. But this was completely different to me. I was with disturbed adults now, people who had years of illness deteriorating their mind, not little angry kids anymore. I actually felt scared for the first time because of the high level of unpredictability with these people. I knew I wasn't all there in the head, but even these people had made me anxious and made it difficult to try and get any rest that night. You know the feeling of being awake, but you haven't opened your eyes yet? The feeling where you're barely waking up and everything's fuzzy. This is the state of consciousness that I was in later that night. I felt like I was waking up, but as if something was waking me up, yet still tired, so I wasn't opening my eyes. The more I came to, I felt pressure on my forehead, and I could sense sweat dripping on my face. I opened my eyes to find the roommate standing over my bed staring at me in the eye, with one hand on my forehead and the other in a balled up fist on her chest while she speaks in what I assume was tongues. I look into her eyes and they're blank and empty of any emotion. She keeps speaking faster and getting louder. I'm paralyzed at this moment, not sure what to do or what she would even do if I were to yell or move. It was only us in the room, and the nurse's station is all the way at the end of the hall. She started swiping the sweat off my forehead while speaking fast and erratic, and I wasn't really sure what she was doing or planned on doing next. She then put both hands on my forehead, and at this point was screaming while shaking me, but not long before a nurse came in and then took her off me. The nurse seemed more irritated that she had to get up and do her job rather than concerned how I was doing or feeling. She escorted the woman out and just said not to worry and to just go back to sleep. I don't know how, but I did manage to fall back to sleep. I assume she got transferred to the more severe ward because I didn't see her again the next day, and luckily I was able to leave later that day. This incident has since been a reminder for me to never go back and to really manage my mental well-being, because while I have issues, I could be in a far worse state of mind. I still wake up some nights with lingering anxiety, and I have to calm myself down to go back to sleep. I never want to go back to a ward in my life to experience this again, or something far worse. This happened to me about 3 months ago. A little background about myself. I suffer from chronic pain due to a back injury that has required 3 surgeries. Most of the time I deal with it and just live my life, but every few years it starts to really take a toll on me. I fall into a deep depression, stop talking to my family, and generally turn into a hermit. Whenever this happens, my family gets really worried that I might hurt myself. I have no idea why, since I've never even made an attempt or even mentioned it, so they send me to the psychiatric ER. They usually put me on a 5150 hold. For those who don't know, that's a 72-hour hold, then send me off to the local psych ward. None of this has really bothered me before. I have good insurance, so the place they send me is basically like a hotel, except you can't have shoelaces or touch anyone. The worst part is when they wheel you in. You're strapped to a gurney, and if you come in during the day, you're wheeled right through the day room where all the other patients can stare at you as you come in. This might be a good time to describe myself. I'm a male, a little over 6'2" and around 285 pounds with tattoos covering both arms. Since I've been depressed for months, my beard and hair are out of control, and I look like a generic biker. As a result, I generally don't have anyone trying to mess with me. I'm friendly, but unless you know me, I really don't look approachable. Since I've been through this a couple of times before, I know the drill. They take all my info, make sure I have no laces or anything with strings, and then show me to my room. The psych ward is co-ed, but roommates must be of the same sex. It's also low security, meaning everyone there is supposedly non-violent. My only issue with this place is that they mix people like me, those who have no mental illness but are just going through a tough time, with people at all different levels of mental illness. But during my previous visits, I'd never had an issue with anyone, so I was just hoping to do my 3 days and be done with it. I get to my room and the nurse tells me I'll be sharing it with a guy named Tim. She starts to say something along the lines of, Tim is, well, he's a nice guy, which immediately makes me wary. But we are in a psych ward. Everyone here has some issues. These rooms are pretty much like any crappy motel room, only bigger. There are 2 beds, a bathroom, which annoyingly doesn't have a full door, 1 desk, and each patient gets their own dresser. It's 3 p.m. and Tim is sound asleep, which isn't that weird since everyone is on different meds or just has weird sleep habits. I'm exhausted after spending hours in the ER and getting checked in, so I decided to lie down. I fell asleep almost instantly. I have no idea how long I slept, but when I woke up, it's pitch black outside, and the only light is the little floor light that you can't turn off. Tim is sitting wide awake on his bed and he's making a psst sound. What's up, man? I'm Brian. Would have said hi earlier, but you were asleep. I try to be as friendly as possible since it's easier to get along with everyone in places like this.
Yeah, I try to sleep as much as possible so I don't have to interact with the demons,
Tim says. This should have been a giant red flag, and also my cue to ask for a new room. But Tim was much smaller than me, and they search you when you first come in. I had no reason to fear him, so I decided to make conversation. I asked him about these demons, which turned out to just be the nurses and doctors. After a while, I told him I was still really tired and needed more sleep. He responded,
"Okay, it's really nice to have a fellow human as a roommate."
I took this as a sign that he was okay with me and that I wouldn't have to sleep with one eye open. I wake up early for breakfast since I haven't eaten in 24 hours and go sit down. Tim comes out and sits with me. Besides referring to the nurses and doctors as demons, he seemed pretty normal. We chatted about normal things for a while, until he suddenly stopped talking and started staring at something behind me.
"You see her? That's Jessica. She's an angel."
I turn around and see a gorgeous girl who looks to be in her early 20s, maybe even 18 or 19. She waves and says hi to Tim. She seems like one of those bubbly girls who really goes out of her way to be super nice to everyone. When I look back at Tim, he's staring at her a little too much, so I snap my fingers and say, "Hey man, don't freak her out." He gives me a very confused look like I've just said the most absurd thing in the world, then goes quiet. I didn't think much of it since I had my own stuff to deal with. The rest of my day went as usual in a place like this. Go to meetings, talk to the doctor, take your meds, etc. But for the most part, you're just bored out of your mind. The TV gets 4 channels, and even though one of them is HBO, it's always hit or miss. So I spend most of the time reading books in the day room. While I'm reading, Jessica comes up, sits down next to me, and then introduces herself. She starts asking me all kinds of questions about my tattoos, what I'm reading, and basically my whole life story. Like me, she's just a normal person having a hard time. She has no mental illness to speak of. Her issue is just bad anxiety that causes panic attacks. She just started college and couldn't handle the pressure. We ended up talking for a few hours and I don't even think about it until later, but Tim is walking past us over and over again. A lot of people do laps to pass the time, so I didn't think much of it. I later found out that he was basically staring a hole through the back of my head every time he walked past. After talking to Jessica, I tell her I'm going to take a shower before dinner and then we can catch up more later. The bathrooms in this place only have half doors, like an Old West saloon door but solid. When I get out, I can see Tim's legs and socks under the door. "What's up, man? Do you need to use the bathroom?" "I'll just be a minute. I just gotta change." He doesn't say anything, just stands there. "Dude, just back up, will you? You're freaking me out a little." I can hear him breathing really fast and hard now. These doors don't lock. He could just push it open if he wanted to. "Dude, you need to back up. I need to come out." And he then starts screaming at me,
"You're Satan! You're Lucifer!"
over and over again. At this point, I'm really freaking out. If I open the door and beat the crap out of him, I'll be the one who gets sedated and put in the quiet room. But I don't know what else to do. And even though he's screaming at the top of his lungs, no nurses seem to be coming out. The doors to the bedrooms in this place are really thick, probably because patients scream in the middle of the night a lot and they don't want to wake up the others. It's a nice policy, but it's really putting me in a bind right now. After what seems like 10 minutes, but was probably just closer to 1, just as I'm getting ready to reenact the bathhouse scene from Eastern Promises, he stops and leaves the room. I get dressed and immediately go find a nurse to tell them what just happened. I don't know what they said to him, but they immediately put me in another room. I don't see him again for the rest of the night, but I'm legit freaked out. No one has ever screamed at me or cornered me like that before, and I can't sleep at all that night. Since they don't have clocks, I have no idea what time it is, but I hear him from the day room near the nurse's station.
"Where is he?
Why isn't he coming back to sleep? He's using the same tone he used when he screamed at me in the bathroom. I crack my door just a bit and can hear the nurse talking to him. You'll see him in the morning and you can talk to him then. Just go back to bed, the nurse tells him.
But I have to see him tonight. It's an emergency.
This goes on for another 30 seconds before security finally gets there. I can hear a scuffle, but there's no way I'm going out there to see what's going on. I hear him yelling still, but it starts to fade. He's still yelling, but they're taking him somewhere else. I figure they're just taking him to the quiet room, which is on the opposite side of the ward from my room. Needless to say, even though he was supposedly put in the quiet room, I lay awake the entire night. Morning comes and my doctor's already there, which I find strange because I usually only see him after dinner time. He calls me into the interview room to talk as soon as he sees me. He asks me about my entire interaction history with Tim. I go over everything, and at the end of it, he just tells me not to worry. Tim has been transferred to a completely different hospital. He names the hospital, and I then realize that it's a very hardcore place, the kind of facility where they lock you in a room most of the day. I feel a little bad since I know Tim probably just thought I was stealing his angel, but whatever. It's also a relief to know I won't have to hit some poor guy in the face for creeping me out. I finish my stay and actually feel a lot better. My pain is being better managed, and I'm ready to stop being a hermit. My grandma comes to pick me up, and just as I think we're ready to leave, the doctor's there again really early. My grandma gives me this look that freaks me out a little, and I'm thinking they're going to make me stay longer. Once again, we went into the interview room. This is when they tell me what really happened that night, which they didn't want me to know until I completed my treatment. That night, Tim kept coming out over and over again to ask the nurse when I was coming to bed. The nurse just kept telling him he'd see me in the morning and didn't mention that I had switched rooms. Well, apparently this went on for hours before he finally started screaming about it. When security arrived and Tim started screaming, they moved him to the quiet room and gave him a shot to knock him out. The nurse thankfully called Tim's doctor and told him the situation. His doctor said they needed to move Tim to the medium security wing upstairs just for a few days until I left. When they went to gather Tim's clothing and other supplies, they found a 7-inch piece of metal that he had broken off from the table in the TV room. The TV room has a camera, but it also has windows where you can see the nurse's station, which didn't always have someone sitting at it. My guess is Tim waited until the nurses left and then worked on breaking off the piece of metal. I'm 99.99% certain that me asking to change rooms is what saved me from being stabbed to death while I slept, and the doctors agreed. That's why he was sent to the more hardcore hospital. Since he never actually attacked me, he wasn't charged with a crime. I have no idea how long he was held at the other hospital, but I'll be a happy man if I never run into him again. For some background information, about 2 years ago, I had to go to a psychiatric facility so I could deal with my depression issues. At this time, I was a 14-year-old girl. I was at the hospital for 3 days when all of this started. The third day I was there, I woke up with an awful stomach ache. I convinced the nurses to let me stay in from the activities and sleep off the pain. So I'm alone in the hospital plus the staff when the patient phone starts ringing. I run over to answer thinking it would be my boyfriend calling, but instead it's a man's voice that I don't recognize.
Hi, can I talk to Sandra?
I was the only patient there, so I said she wasn't there.
Oh, alright. Thanks. Who is this?
The voice had sounded a lot like my friend's dad, who I had just met the night before during visiting hours. I told him my name, figuring he would recognize it.
Oh, what are you in here for?
He asked. I told him it was personal. This started to raise red flags for me, because I had told my friend's dad why I was there the night before.
Did you fight to get in here? Like beat up other girls?
I said no, and I was very quickly becoming creeped out. It took a few more personal questions for me to realize that there was no Sandra at the hospital. I wasn't sure on everyone's names, but I definitely hadn't heard Sandra before. I really started becoming uncomfortable, and I told him I had to go, and that was that. Visiting hours come around and there's a phone call for me. A man asking for me, saying it was my dad. But my dad was sitting right next to me. I explained that he had called earlier, and my dad was pissed. He went over to the phone and then demanded to know who was calling. The man didn't say anything, just hung up. After a couple more calls asking for me by name, I told the hospital staff. They became very concerned and we weren't allowed to answer the phones for a while. Apparently, a convicted rapist had been calling the mental hospital for years, getting names of the girls who would answer the phone. He then learns whatever information he learns from the girls and then calls back continually posing as their dad or boyfriend. Apparently, he even tried to pick up patients a couple of times. The weirdest part is that when you call the hospital, you have to know the birthday of the patient that you're trying to reach, or the staff won't even put you through. So he somehow knew a bunch of crazy teenage girls' info and then used it to prey on us when we would least expect it. It definitely freaked me the hell out, seeing as he should have been the one in the hospital. My name is Brad, and the story I'm about to tell you is about the fear of nightmares, fear and anxiety that I couldn't escape. Here it goes. I'm a patient at a mental asylum on the west side of New York. It's one of the worst places that a patient could ever be admitted to. I've heard many things about this hospital. You're searched before you even enter the building. Half of the patients here are really creepy and unsettling. They look like they haven't been washed in days or maybe even months. I was assigned to room 154. It was a big asylum, the biggest one I'd ever been in. I was diagnosed with major depression, anxiety, and anger disorder. I often had to hurt myself, beat myself up, or cut myself over and over again because of the problems I've been dealing with. I've had them since I was born. My parents would always ask me about the cuts and bruises on my arms and body. I'd tell them that I fell or that I hurt myself accidentally while shaving, just to get them off my back. I didn't want to tell them the truth about what I was going through. I was 18 when I was sent to the asylum. I made very few friends, but there was this one girl who seemed to like me. We sat together at lunch and talked about our lives. She had problems of her own. She was a victim of abuse, with her own struggles with mental illness and depression. I could really feel what she had been through. We spent a lot of time talking and getting to know each other better, but there was one patient who really gave me the creeps. He had scars on his arms and face, and looked almost like a monster. To this day, I don't even know his name or any history on him. All I knew was that he was really dangerous. He was assigned to the room next to mine, and I could barely sleep with him so close. He would talk in a deep voice, and sometimes he talked in his sleep. I told the nurses, begging them to move him to another room upstairs, but they just told me not to pay him any mind. I told them, "How am I supposed to ignore him when he talks to himself in the middle of the night?" The nurse simply replied, "I'm sorry, but I can't do anything about that." So I just forced myself to sleep that night. The next morning during breakfast, they took me out of my room. I felt really uncomfortable because the guy next door gave me this death stare in the cafeteria, as if he was planning to kill me in my sleep. Knowing his kind of craziness, I just brushed it off. I told myself, it's an insane asylum. There are going to be people who act weird or crazy. I just have to deal with this. But later that night when I was trying to sleep, I heard him again. My heart sank. He tapped on the wall between our rooms and said, "I know who you are. I know what you look like. You tried to be my friend." I responded back, I don't know you, sir, and I don't want to be your friend. You're creepy and weird." He then spoke in a menacing tone. "I am the voice of the devil, and I'll torment you until death." I didn't even know what to say. I was shaking, terrified. I thought to myself, what is this guy going to do to me? Am I even safe in this tiny room? Am I going to survive the night? I tried to sleep, but the fear really kept me awake. The next day, I went to the nurses to report what had happened. They said they'd keep an eye on him, which made me feel a little better. But I didn't see or hear from him again until later that day at lunch. That's when things got really unsettling. He had a fork in his pocket. My heart dropped. I thought, this guy's going to kill me before this is over. I have to get out of here. I went to the nurses and told them about the fork. They searched for him but didn't find anything. They probably didn't look thoroughly enough, or maybe he had hidden it somewhere else. That night I laid in bed trying to sleep when he came right up to my door. He then said, "Are you scared, Brad? You should be scared." Then he leaned in with the fork and then stabbed me in my chest and arms. I screamed for the nurses, my voice desperate as blood poured from my wounds. They eventually came running, opened my door, and then pulled him off of me. My blood was everywhere. I was terrified. I knew he was capable of hurting me, and he proved it right then. The staff and nurses told me that he was being transferred to Virginia State Hospital, at least 7,900 miles away, maybe even more. They assured me that he wouldn't be a threat anymore. Thank God that he was far away from me now. My days at this asylum were eventually over. I was finally going home. I'm very relieved and thankful that I had survived that. It was a horrific time being there. I've been wanting to tell this story for a while. Okay, so this was a little over a decade ago when I was a teenager. I live in a smallish town in New Zealand. In my area, there was an abandoned mental asylum that got closed down due to things like abuse of the patients, etc. It's located deep in a valley away from civilization, and the locals at the time shared ghost stories and the like. The stories ranged from actual ghosts to old patients who had been left up there to die, coming back and then walking the wards. Basically, everyone knew weird crap went on there. At the time, the place was fully closed and empty except for a few things, and lots of people had managed to break into the boarded up buildings and walk in the wards and so on. In fact, the swimming pool that the patients used back in the day was still being used for disabled people. There's a very strange man who lives up there and is like the caretaker of the land. We all knew what he looked like. Some of my friends and I decided we would go up there for the fun of it. None of us believed in ghosts, and we still don't. So we head up the valley, found a bush to hide our bicycles in, and left one friend who didn't want to come at the bottom to tell us if the police or if the old man was coming, via cell phone text. Personally, I had a strange feeling about the whole thing. I am very intuitive, but the strange feeling kept growing, and as the day went on, it eventually turned into me feeling like we were being watched. We came across the abandoned buildings. They were spooky but cool. They were boarded up, but my friend, who was quite strong, managed to rip off some of the boards, and then we went inside. It was what you'd expect from an abandoned mental asylum that many other people had broken into. Lots of rooms, all trashed. Now, the only ghostly thing that really happened was in one particular room. All of our cell phones had no reception, but everywhere else it was fine. It didn't really bother us that much. We keep walking around for a bit in the main building, but I still feel weird. My cell phone then rings. It was the friend we left at the bottom of the valley telling us the old man had found him, and he told him that he called the cops and they were on their way. The main building has bushy hills behind it, so we ran up there to hide. I get out my phone to see how the friend is doing waiting at the bottom with the strange old man, but there's no cell reception, so we're hiding in some bushes and I still feel like we're being watched. About maybe 15 minutes go by. We see from our hiding spot that no cop car has gone past the main building yet. We decide to walk a little further into the woods and bush and try to walk over to the next valley, and then walk all the way down so as to not go the main way down and encounter the police and strange old caretaker guy. Suddenly, we came across a weird building structure coming out of the hillside. Imagine a house being buried into a hillside with only the roof really visible, and then the rest of the building is underground. We obviously thought that this was freaking weird, and even weirder still, the only way into and out of this building seemed to be a latch on the roof. As curious teenagers, we needed to know what the hell was in there. So my strong friend tried opening the latch. It was locked or so old and rusty that it couldn't be opened. We almost walked away when we decided we could probably just rip the corrugated iron roof off and see what's inside. After lots of tries, we got it. We were all kneeled around the hole that we had made. It was pitch black inside. We had arguments about who should go in. There was no way it was going to be me, but we played rock, paper, scissors to see. I didn't have to go in. One of my friends did. We helped him down. There were no stairs or ladder from the latch door. He fell quite a bit down and twisted his ankle a little. We could only hear him in the pitch black below. He turned his cell phone light on. From what we could see above, it was 2 rooms separated by a concrete wall. In the room we could see best, there appeared to be a bed and a chair, and then some old-ass magazines and old opened and consumed cans of food. My friend below confirmed all of this, and also let out a huge, "Dude, what the hell?" And then he threw a human skull up to us. By this point, my friend was like, "Dude, get me the hell out of here." So we all put our hands down and we helped me out of there. Thank God. At that very point in the trees further up the hill, a big branch fell down from a tree. I say to my friends, "Yeah, let's get the hell out of here." So we follow our original plan of walking over to the next valley and walking all the way back down that way. We found where we needed to go and started walking down a hill which was no longer trees and bush. It was just farmland with some cows and sheep on it. We were walking down the hill in a single file line. I was at the back of the line. I feel a strong hand on my shoulder, and I turn around like, "What the hell?" There's a man about 40 years old in full camo gear, with a very old school World War I type rifle pointed right at my face. Now, guns aren't that easy to obtain in New Zealand. He didn't look normal at all, and he wasn't the same old man who looked after the land. He then says, "What are you doing here?" We then say, "We just came to explore and shoot our BB gun around." To which he then replies, "No, you're lying to me. I've been following you since you put down your bikes. What were you doing at the old shed down there? Who do you work for?" We then just say, "Just an old shed? Is that right? I think we both know that there's more to it than that." And he says, "I'm the one asking the damn questions." At this point, we were scared shitless, but the strong friend I have, well, he wasn't. He could fight very well when he needed to, and he also knew some kung fu. And at this point, he was sick of this guy pointing a gun in our faces, so he quickly grabbed the gun and managed to get it right out of the man's grip, and they fought over it for a bit. Then it fell and rolled down the hill, and we freaking ran. We turned back and look, and this guy is just smiling at us all evil-like, then yelling out, "If you tell anyone about anything you've seen, you're all dead. I know your names, and he's waiting for you by your bikes." The he was the old man, aka caretaker, and he was actually waiting by our bikes. The other friend who waited was gone. This part was weird because he and the other camo rifle guy must have had walkie-talkies or something, because the old man then said to us, "If we ever see any of you up here again, you won't be leaving as easily. And if you talk about what you saw, I'll know and I will find you. We know your names." We asked, "What did you do with our friend?" To which he then told us, "He ran away and left you. He's probably with the cops at the gate." We had found our friend just further down where the public road starts by himself. He also had a gun pulled on him by the old man, so he ran away. No police. I don't really know how to end this story, but something really weird happened there. Oh, and I've even seen the old man at the supermarket years since this incident, and he gave me a very strange look. Some things to note: the police never came. Perhaps they were never called? I'm not sure. Since this happened years later, all remnants of the main buildings have been suspiciously burned down. Anyway, hopefully I don't meet them again. Also, I'll happily answer any of your questions when I can. I actually think I can remember exactly where this weird shed was, and I could probably take someone there. My personal theory about the shed was that I think when the place got closed down, there was nowhere for some of the more severely insane patients to go, and some of the families didn't care, so they possibly just threw them in these weird chambers to die in the hills. Another theory I have about the camo guy with the gun is that he may have been one of those patients ages ago, because he did not look sane at all. Hey everyone, sorry for the interruption, but I just wanted to mention this before continuing. I actually narrated this story a very long time ago, but it's since been deleted off my channel. And since it fit the theme of the video, I decided to go ahead and re-narrate it. So if you don't want to listen, I'll understand. This is a story where someone encounters a real-life version of Negan from the show The Walking Dead at an abandoned insane asylum. If you've already heard it and you don't care to listen, you can stop listening now. For everyone else, let's continue on. So this happened about 2 hours ago. I'm pretty shaken up, but as soon as I got out, the first thing that crossed my mind was to post my encounter to Let's Not Meet as soon as I got home. So here I am. To give a little background information, I'm a film student in college right now, and my college buddies and I are trying to find new locations to film our movies at. I make horror films, so all the places I'm looking for and exploring are abandoned. And tonight, my group of friends and I decided to check out this abandoned hospital down the street from our school. There were 10 of us in total. They had been there before and said that it was a great spot for filming and that I should check it out. Tonight was that night. So when we get there, I have my Nikon DSLR camera out with a handheld LED light attached to the top of the camera to scout the place out when we get inside. I didn't film any of the encounter, because I usually only film the inside of these places, but I had my camera and light out to shine the way through. I was leading the way down this narrow path that led to these walls that we had to climb to get on the roof of the place, where we could access one of the rooms to get inside the building. Because I was carrying my camera and bag, I was trying to look for another way up. So I walk a little further down this narrow path, and I start noticing a lot of clothes and random shoes and cardboard boxes lying around the area. There was even an empty sleeping bag. That's when I knew that we probably weren't alone, and we're likely going to run into someone if we made the wrong move. And boy, did we ever. One of my friends walking behind me down this path notices a door to my right. It's closed, and my guess was that it was locked and not worth trying. But he already has his hand on the door handle and starts tugging. I look over and it barely cracks open, but something is holding it from the inside. I shine my LED on the inside, and I see a shirt tied to the inside door handle to another part of the room, acting as a lock. But my friend, being the way he is, tugs again and rips that shirt right off, and then the door swings open. Inside, there is someone sleeping on like a table or couch, alongside with a group of terrifying looking people sitting by a light inside that room, and they all just stop and stare at us. In the short glimpse that I got, my friend then yells, "Oh shit, let's get the hell out of here," and slams the door and just bolts right past me. I was standing there a little shaken, almost feeling like I should apologize, but I just followed him instead. My other 8 friends are already on the roof at this point, asking what's going on, and we just run for our lives out of the area. I hear the door in the path then swing open, but I couldn't look back. From there, me and my friend rendezvous back to a higher part of the area, away from any entrance leading to the hospital. There's a small gap that you can jump across to get to one of the roofs of the buildings that my other friends were on. About 4 of them follow us and jump across, ready to get out of there, but the others stay on the roof and watch us, stuck like statues. I look at them, kind of confused at what they're staring at, and I begin to hear this metal dragging on the concrete. I turn around and there's a crazy looking man, maybe mid-20s, dragging a baseball bat with nails all along the end. He's walking towards us as he drags the bat along the concrete, acting just like Negan from The Walking Dead. My heart sinks. At this point, I turn off my light, and all that's shining is the moonlight. I keep my hand on my pocket knife, desperately trying to think of anything to do if he starts swinging, but I knew there was no way I would come out alive if I tried anything. Plus, I gotta take care of my camera. So he walks closer to us, and the first thing he says is,
"You're gonna want to keep that light off."
And everyone is silent. I'm practically shaking. He then starts circling around us and he says,
"You guys are never gonna come back here, right?"
He walks past me and sees the camera and raises his bat, then saying,
"And you're gonna put the camera away."
And I just barely say, Yeah, it's off." He looks over to my friends watching on the roof past the gap, and he points to them, then says,
"Jump."
And they stand silent. The guy says again,
"Jump across right now. Just run and jump. You'll make it."
Keep in mind, the gap doesn't look that bad, but the drop is fatal if you don't make the jump. And my 4 friends are all staring down at the drop, fearing what could happen. One of them says, "I don't think I can make it." And the Negan guy replies,
"Run and jump, now, or else you're gonna regret it."
So my friend steps back, runs, and barely makes the jump. From there, one by one, the other 3 make the jump across, all while the Negan guy is standing right behind us with his bat, dragging it along the concrete. Once we all got across, he says to us,
"You're never coming back here again. You understand?"
And we awkwardly apologize and run away back to our cars in the distance. I get in my car and look back at the area, and he's still standing there watching us with his bat as we speed off. Now, realistically, we could have probably ganged up on him as a group if anything bad happened, but who knows who else was back there. Sadly, the hospital is a no-go from here on out, but I'll still be looking around for some sick locations. What scared me the most about this was how fearless and disturbed this guy looked. He'd definitely seen some shit, and had undoubtedly used that bat before on someone else. He looked like a killer. He was a killer, and it was his calmness that really got to me. Definitely a lesson learned, but regardless, to the Negan guy, I hope we don't see you again. Update. I just woke up for an 8 a.m. class, and I'm gonna call the cops as soon as I'm out. Our first thought wasn't to call the cops because none of us were supposed to be there, especially that late at night, but still, I will be contacting them. Now, this is something that I really want to talk about to be sure that everyone is cautious and stays level-headed at all times. Now for context, I live in the middle of nowhere in Canada. It was an old town that had quite a few abandoned buildings due to absence of residents. Me and many friends were tired of lack of entertainment options for us, so what we did was explore these abandoned buildings. Prior to the experience I'm about to talk about, we never really had anything too crazy happen to us. I mean, occasionally we'd see a small bit of blood-like liquid, and we did see a pentagram on the ground from someone who went to a house previously, but nothing too bad. Until the last time I had gone exploring abandoned buildings. Now, when I was younger, I used to go to a daycare that was part mental hospital. Strange combination, I know. It was closed down due to a lack of patients and lack of children at the daycare. I decided to go back there with my friends a few years ago. For context, I was 15 when this happened. Most of my friends were the same age. When we did get there, it was rather cliche. There was fog and it was rather dark and there was a light drizzle of rain. We went to the main gate, which was padlocked shut. We decided to help each other hop over it and made a ton of noise while doing so. We were laughing and giggling the whole time, unsuspecting of what has yet to come. We looked around the small play place and park with flashlights that we had on our person. Even with our somewhat powerful flashlights, our visibility was rather limited. We decided to enter the decaying building. Glass and dirt crunched under our feet as we stepped into the daycare section of the complex. There were still old Legos, wood chips from previous furniture, old torn dolls and toys strewn about. The further we walked around the daycare section, we naturally became more and more silent, until all we could hear was the crunch of the dirt under our feet. I found some crayons in a plastic container in the corner of the room. I walked over to pick them up, when all of a sudden we heard a loud crash coming from behind a metal door leading to the psych ward part of the building. My friends and I looked at each other. As a whole, we were a group of 5. Most of them were very bold and cocky. We all just looked at each other when my friend Brian suggested that we go and look to see where the sound came from. Personally, I wasn't too fond of that idea, but with my group of friends, there was no way anyone was going to decline to such a thing. We all stacked up on the door and opened it. It was rusted to the floor and we had to get it open. As we walked in, the metallic smells and must became even stronger, with a hint of something else which I couldn't put my finger on at that moment. We walked in. Our flashlights pointed in every direction, with Brian leading the group. The hallways were tight, and to the left and right were the occasional metal doorway with some doors open. I felt slightly claustrophobic, and it felt a little hard to breathe. As we continued, Brian shined his flashlight into a room and recoiled. We all stopped walking as Brian slowly entered the room. "What is it?" I asked him. "I thought I saw someone here. It all seems fine now." To be honest, I thought he was just messing with us to increase our anxiety. But looking back, I think he was completely honest. He backed out of the room and we continued walking deeper into the psych ward, when another friend then swiftly told us to stop. We came to a halt and all listened. In the distance ahead of us, we heard the subtle pitter-patter of footsteps echo through the hallway. We all looked at each other, fear in each of our eyes. Brian continued walking toward the sounds. We considered turning back for a brief second without Brian, wondering if some ghost or something was in the building, but we couldn't do that to him. The closer we got, the more I felt like I was being watched. We finally entered a room on the right which had the smell of rotting meat. In front of us was a dead deer. Its innards were spilled all over the floor, staining the concrete. One of my friends had a very weak stomach and then vomited all over the floor. That's when we heard whispering from somewhere. Brian shined his flashlight into the corner of the room where a man with short hair was standing with his head down. He wore a bright green t-shirt stained with what I assume was blood and torn beige pants. He didn't have any socks and his feet seemed damaged. He was twitching sporadically and continued to mumble even after we saw him. We stared at him for a solid 30 seconds before he made his first true movement. He then looked up at us with a haunting grin that sent shivers down our spines. "You guys here for the feast?" he said, each word with a varying inflection and energy. This kicked us over the edge, and we bolted the hell out of that room all the way back to the daycare center. The door was still open, and we decided to try and slam it shut, but the rust and pure weight of the door almost kept it open. It took 3 of us piling with all of our strength to close it. And just before we did, I could still see the silhouette of the man watching us, his teeth being the only other human feature I could see. We sat behind the metal door catching our breaths for a second, all looking at each other for confirmation that we all saw the same thing. After a little bit of labored breathing from each of us, we heard a light tapping on the door. That's when we decided that it was time to leave. We booked it out of the vicinity completely and ran home. A year after we visited that spot, police went back to do a routine search of the area and they actually found the man. It was stated that this guy used to go to the psych ward before it closed down. He escaped the facility he was transferred to and lived off the wildlife around the complex. When the cops brought him in, he had a series of diseases and sicknesses from eating raw meat. His mental condition was much worse than before. There were some rumors that he did kill someone in the forest while searching for food, but nothing's been confirmed. In the end, guys, please be careful, especially in dangerous areas such as abandoned buildings. You know, like a psych ward.